All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting of the Shelburne Planning Commission on June 22nd. Take a call to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. I will, prior to requesting a motion, will say that Brandy Saxon is going to be coming in later, so we're going to swap items 6 and 7. So we'll do a review of the comprehensive plan and then do the zoning issues. If there are no questions or comments, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda with those changes. And it's moved by Kate.
Second.
Second by Dick.
Just need to remember to do the photo at the end when Jamie's here.
Okay. Right after you leave, right? All right. So the next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. We have two sets from June 5th and June 8th. Should those be two separate or we go? Okay. So take a motion to approve the minutes for June 5th, and then we discuss. Right? So a motion to approve the June 5th minutes? And the second?
Second.
All right, now discussion. I did not have any comments on the June 5th minutes. And I think not everybody was there. Are there any comments from those who were there? No. All right. I don't want to mess up, or do you have about to say something?
Not
No?
really. No, it's not in there.
Oh, okay. If there's a correction or anything you want in there.
No, not really.
Okay.
I was late. I don't know if that needs to be on
You're good. Okay, so should we go through and then do the approval of the June 8th and all in favor, all of them, or all in favor?
I would go all the way to vote on the motion for the first set.
Okay. So all in favor for approving the minutes of June 5th?
there. Aye.
All right. That passed. Let's move on to the minutes of June 8th. I'll take a motion to approve those.
So moved.
And a second? Second. So moved by Dick, second by Perry. Open to discussion. I had one comment that is really small on section 6. In the vision section, on the last point, it lists out 4 points. And before point 4, there's I just add and.
So what?
Just put in and.
And?
Yeah. Just so we don't have no corrections on anything. There any other comments? All right, well, not hearing any. All in favor of approving the minutes of June 8th?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, the minutes of June 8th are approved. Moving on to item number 4, any disclosures relating to any potential conflicts of interest for any agenda items? Seeing none, no disclosures. Move on to item 5, open to the public. We definitely have people here today. Are there any comments on non-agenda items?
Is
Yes.
discussing the town plan part of your agenda item? Is that where we get to speak?
It is, and this is where I'm curious, because we're specifically going to be doing a draft review for comments on the land use section of the town plan, and I did see the email from earlier today. So if you had specific comments that you just want to get on the record in the next few minutes kind of thing, we can do that. And then as we go through the land use section, if there are particular items that you want to comment on or address.
Well, I guess this is our chance then. Yes, I'm going to allow that.
Can we do a, yeah. sorry.
And I
13.
live on Bay Road, and I'm here with some of my neighbors. And the Bay Road proposal went through from the Bike Path Committee through the scoping to the Select Board that was voted down. That seemed to be lacking the checks and balances of going through zoning or planning, where there are specific considerations written. For example, we found in the zoning bylaws, page 1, some excellent points that we, as a community, would like to see added to the town plan in section 6, the pedestrian bicycle transportation section. We've even drafted a copy for you guys to start with, called Existing Roads and Property Impacts. Now, I could read it, but it's not quite complete. But here are the zoning bylaws that we specifically would like to see included in the town plan. And there's a lot of good words that could go with it. But the protection of the residential areas from undue concentrations, protect them from the loss of peace, quiet, and privacy, preserve and protect scenic and natural views, facilitate appropriate growth as to create an optimum environment, and have due consideration for the property rights of affected property owners. Now, this is kind of it's not verbatim, but the zoning bylaws have some great regulations that, had they been used as guidelines, that scoping plan would have never made it out of the Bike Path Committee. And since there's a large section in the town plan about pedestrian and bike paths, we think it's appropriate to include in there some words for existing and older roads and property impacts, so that there's just some checks and balances in the town plan that should be addressed prior to plans getting kind of growing on their own, and scaring the heck out of residents when they see something that's terribly invasive. We'd also like to be included at the beginning. We feel property owners have the right and should be included at the beginning of any plan to modify the road that they live on. You've just gone through a huge update for the site plan, where pedestrian and bike paths were added to every single paragraph. I read it, every single paragraph, bike, pedestrian. That's for new, but the older ones are different, and we should have something on the books to acknowledge that and protect the older neighborhoods from excessive plans. And what we're going to do is leave our email addresses. I will actually send Kate, and Kate, I don't know if I have your email, but I do have Jamie's. We're going to send a list of email addresses for very interested property owners that would like to be included when the pedestrian bike path plan is being updated. And I'm assuming that it's open to be updated as part of the town plan. You're going through a review. We don't know what the process is, so you'll have to educate us. But we want to become involved. We want to improve it. We want to put in safeguards that will not just benefit our road, but I'm thinking French Village could come under attack. You know, their houses are very close to the road. The rest of Boswick Road is wide open, but that's what my goal is, and some of my neighbors feel the same. So how do we go about this?
That's good. First, I'll say thank you for being here. This is how the whole process works. I think having input absolutely helps guide the direction that we go in, and it's better to have people involved in that process than not, which happens often. As far as the process goes, at least from a planning commission standpoint, the agenda is posted prior to, so if ever there's a discussion point regarding the town plan having to do with land use, which I think would be the ideal place for a lot of that language, and you're absolutely right, we did go through and update language to include paths and transportation and that sort of thing. Anytime there is something around land use, I would fully encourage you to come in and hear the dialogue and provide input. Similar to what's going to happen tonight, we have 45 minutes slated maybe a little bit more, to talk about that section of the comprehensive plan, and we're just getting into it at this point, so early in the process is good. And having the list of email addresses in terms of notifications, I may have to defer to Dean on that, but as far as, particular notifications beyond what's posted in agendas, I don't know how the administrative process might work for something like that, but. Yeah, I mean, it's something that can be done, right? It's there.
If there's an email list, yeah, I think one of the things that really is important is to either make sure that the agenda packet, there's a mailing that goes out to a large number of people in the town with a copy of the Planning Commission agenda. And it may be simplest to just add all those emails to that list, because that will tell people a few days in advance of the meeting what the agenda items are on that. I think that that's safer than trying to send out a specific mailing at a specific time, because, for example, my reaction to some of the comments that Linda made earlier, where I believe what she was doing was pulling some language from the purpose statement, it almost seems to me like what they would want to do is influence the vision statement. So I don't want to misjudge where they think their interests lie, and instead, I think, basically understand that the Planning Commission is going to be talking about the plan from now until when it's done. And maybe the safest thing to do is to assume the possibility exists that you might want to plug your comments into the topic of the day, rather than to try to, say that, well, your comments really have a lot to do with transportation, so make sure you're taking part in the transportation section.
That's fair. Yeah, the town plan work is going to be going on for months. So I would encourage you to keep an eye on agendas, and where you see any discussion around the plan, look at the details, and then if you have items to contribute. And also, these meetings are posted online, so if there's something that happens in a meeting one week, then at the next one, if you want to come in and comment during the public comment sections on thoughts that you have on that, that would be appropriate.
I'm going to show my ignorance again. Is the pedestrian and bike transportation section under land use, or is that under the transportation?
Yeah, and I think what you are referring to, Linda, is the first, well, there is a transportation section that starts on page 51 of volume 1. And when you're saying sidewalk paths and trails plan, are you referring to that section?
Yes, I think it's on page 54, maybe number 6.
What about page 54?
Oh, I thought that's for the,
Well, the recommended actions, well,
never mind. The one I got is probably the,
sorry, the sidewalk paths and trails policy language, the objectives and recommended actions are on pages 51, 52, and the top part of 53. And we haven't talked about, the commission hasn't talked about when you will take up transportation. But if that's the part that they mean that they would edit, then that's, no pun intended, down the road a little bit. If it is their intention to take the objectives of the zoning bylaw and incorporate them in the document, some of the things are, and I wasn't able to write down what she was saying as she said it, but some of those things maybe would be in the vision. I think it'll just be most helpful to have the comments relate directly to the section that you're working on. Otherwise, you're going to have to try to say, well, here's their material. Where's the best place to try to plug this in the plan? That's really not your job.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed. And the main takeaway that I took from what you said is that there were a lot of amendments made in terms of adding bike paths and pedestrian paths, and the main point is to ensure that existing roads have protections against loss of quiet, privacy, scenic views, that sort of thing. Does
that work for you as far as just communication goes? We'll put you on the distribution list and you'll,
the
okay.
smart thing to do. We've already got a mailing list. Put our email
Yeah.
addresses on there.
Okay, good.
That's
Yeah, I mean, we do that for
practical.
DRB agendas and materials as well, so it makes sense to just plug you into the planning commission.
And then How do we help you?
So, I mean, the way it would work is you'll see tonight. I don't know if you're going to want to stick around and slog through it with us, but we'll be going page by page, and to the extent you want to feed us written comments in advance, that can help guide some of our conversations since we have packets we review in advance. If your preference is to come in and discuss it real time, we're happy to do that as well. It's a little more efficient if we can get a sense of what the comments are in advance, so that we can react as a group and not spend time sort of. But either way, I mean, we're happy to work through it however you would like.
We can polish up our thoughts, send them to you as a group in an email, and then have Dean perhaps communicate with me to let me know where this fits. Because honestly, I don't know what section this might have.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Dean said, may be a challenge for us, is interpreting some of these concepts that may not be directly related to a particular section in the plan. So we're happy to look at it, and to the extent it's part of our packet, we'll review it that way. But if I were you, I would probably look at each agenda, look at the material. It'll be 20, 25 pages that we're reviewing, and then input your own feedback. And it could just be as simple as, flagging certain sections with C comments.
Do you have an extra copy of what you're reviewing tonight, land use, since I didn't do that?
I don't have
I don't
an
have
extra in front of me, but
And we have them digitally, so as the group is talking about them, they'll be projected on the screen, but I didn't make a number
And
of
there will
them.
be multiple iterations of this. You're early in the process, which is good. And also, since you've clearly gone in and looked at bylaws and looked at the current town plan, if there are sections of it that hey, we would like the language to look a little different in this case.
That's what I was talking about, the
It-
town plan.
Exactly, and that is, the town plan is a large document, so if there's if what you see is in the land use section, and for example, tonight we are talking about the land use section, that would be a great time to come in and bring those comments. So your timing is good.
So it's the pedestrian/bicycle transportation section in the land use. It is not,
It's not.
correct?
No,
It's
it's
in
in
the
the-
transportation
yeah.
section.
Yep, it's in a latter section
I
of the
get
town
that.
plan. Yeah,
But
we haven't decided how we're going to review it. It may not be in order as the current
so
plan is
at
configured.
some point, you will be reviewing the transportation section. That will be
Correct.
part of your minutes. And that's when we can come back. And before that, we can send you our thoughts.
Absolutely. Good idea to do both.
That's
Share
one of
that,
the-
share what you have so we can digest it, and then keep your eye on future
And I'm
agendas.
listed as the lead on that section. And
There you go.
I'm listed as sort of the lead on that section.
So that would be the best way to go about doing that. And to Jamie's point, we're not necessarily going in order of the plan, so just keep an eye on those sections, and ahead of time, please provide comments, and then those will get incorporated into the discussion. All right,
Welcome.
great. Were there any other comments from anyone before we?
Well, just one clarification.
Sure.
If there's an email list, I understand that it will be emailed to me, and then I can give it to the person who uses her own list to send out the agendas. I'll be getting that list.
You have an
Okay.
email,
So you want
List,
me to
right?
send
Yeah.
Dean an email?
please.
I'll email Dean email. One more comment, nothing to do with Bay Road. All the town documents I've been reading, somewhere I read that one of the goals is to, retain compatibility or something with our neighboring communities. There was some wording like that somewhere. I would much prefer Shelburne to look south and stay more compatible with Charlotte and Ferrisburg than to look north and turn Shelburne into a South Burlington. And if that's what you guys are for, let's keep Shelburne to the south of our neighbor, let's join the neighbors down south, because I know we're 5 miles from a big city, but we're a small town, we've got the small town feel, and some of the things that I'm seeing look so darn cityish, it really doesn't set well. I don't think it's attractive. We have a lot more to offer than paving over and painting and going concrete. And that's a comment that has nothing to do with anything, but something I read and wanted to mention.
Thank you for sharing that.
Well,
That's the
I'm
kind
sure you really wanted to hear that.
We really do appreciate public comment. That's how this works. Like, we're volunteers on the commission and we're part of the community, so we appreciate all the input, positive and negative.
That's positive. Well, thank you.
All right, did we have any other comments from the public? All right. Well, then let's move on and jump into our comprehensive plan update section. I saw that the first was the vision statement was in our packets. Was the idea to review the comments that we had from last time?
I think the commission could start with the vision. You could also take up the objectives that Kate Lally has drafted in the land use section.
And that's this.
Yes,
guy.
that material, there's a page-and-a-half document that was at your place at the table that I also.
So I was asked to kind of take a stab at the objectives section of the land use as it pertains to the village. And so that's what this represents. And I was trying to kind of synthesize some of the ideas and shorten the number of bullet points. And I think I sort of succeeded at making it a little shorter, but not quite as short as I had thought I would be able to make it. But I wanted to just run it by you guys to see if you think there is further editing that might happen.
So let's see, this would be growth area 1, correct?
Yeah.
Objectives.
Yeah, I think.
We have 14 objectives, right? In the current
Currently,
plan, and
yeah.
we had started sketching out some comments and ideas sort of at the tail end of the last meeting here, and thankfully Kate took the laboring oar and reworked this. I don't know, I guess we haven't had a chance to look at this, so we can take a couple minutes as a group and read it, if that works for everybody, or we can go objective by objective. We had, in my notes from last go-around, we had just started really editing in real time in this section and then probably abandoned that idea. So if you want to take a couple minutes since we just got this, if that's,
Either that or maybe just take a minute for each one. And
You wanna
then
go one by
discuss
one?
it. Yeah, I know
Okay.
Kate just ran out. And procedurally, should I formally pass the baton back to the chair?
yeah, happy to take the
Right on.
gavel back. Thank you,
You got it.
Jason. So let's jump in on the first objective here. Shelburne Village's location along the primary north-south highway linking Vermont's largest metro area. Kate, we're just going to go one by one here, if you're okay with that. We'll just put it up on the screen
Sure.
and work through and get the group's reactions.
So what I tried to do, just generally, is provide a little context for each of the objectives, as opposed to, just kind of having objectives.
And just as you walk us through, did you completely blow these up, or did you sort of look at one and say, I'd like to reshape it and modify it so that we could look at the correlating goal to see how it's changed, or do you know what I mean?
No, we had the original version in the packet last week, so I just typed them up and started kind of playing
started-
with them, yeah. So
Okay.
you would really have to look at the existing comments it just was getting too
Yeah, that's fine.
crazy to do that way.
I wasn't sure if that's what you were getting at, was just to what degree is the.
I was just trying to sync
Yeah.
up, so item 1 would roughly equate to which
Okay,
current
so
objective.
maybe the way to sort of think about this is to, currently, the objectives talk about what should be done, but it doesn't really talk about why. What are we after? What are we trying to achieve? So, so that's what I tried to do, is create a little bit of context. So, you know, so for example, so we're located along the primary north-south highway linking Vermont, Burlington, obviously with southern New England. And this means a lot of people come to our town. So support this strong, positive identity by promoting Shelburne Road as the village's main street. Retain Shelburne Road as 2 lanes through the village, create clearly identifiable entrances to the village. So, you know, there's some, it makes, I just thought it'd be helpful to have it be a little more purposeful.
I like it.
Yeah. And then the second one is, so I've kind of, in this one, I've kind of merged 1 and 2 together, and then talked about, you know, what is the character of the village a little bit. You know, it's, town residents would like the village to be a place where they can shop locally for many of their necessities, meet their neighbors, run into friends, enjoy community celebrations and cultural activities. So help the village become a more vital center for the Shelburne community, serving the needs of the local population as well as visitors.
So as we go through
Yeah.
this, just for the sake of time, if anybody has reactions, comments, objections, additions, anything, just why don't we weigh in real time, if you're okay with that?
Absolutely. And if this can be, you know, synthesized more, please,
Yeah,
let's
and we'll
go for
continue
it. Mm-hmm.
to modify this, but at least to get initial reactions from the other commissioners as we go through this, like, oh, that's a crazy idea, why would we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Or that sounds exactly the way I'm thinking about it. So, section 1, really reinforcing this idea of the village being the main street, retaining the 2 lanes, which we discussed at the last meeting. That jive with everybody?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I like the idea that Kate did of giving it the context. You know, where do we sit? Why is this road important? You know, how does the village relate to the area around it? So, the other one seemed like a pretty scattershot list of 14 things. You know, that's been accreted over time, I think, versus taking a fresh
Yep.
take and, you know, slicing some things out,
Mm-hmm.
reworking it.
And when we say identifiable entrances, is that thinking signage, or is that thinking?
I thought that, I left that kind of purposely a little bit vague.
Mhm.
I think the original language speaks a little more specifically to it, but not, I don't think in a way that's necessarily particularly helpful. It says, where is it?
Yeah, 7.
Yeah, so yeah.
Street
UCI gives
design,
us kinda-
landscaping, yeah,
yeah.
clearly identifiable entrances to the village.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, to me,
Street
it seems like,
design.
you know, that would be an opportunity for, you know, the planning commission and others who are interested to actually come together and talk about, well, what does that mean, actually? You know, how would we like to do that? 'Cause that can be done in a variety of ways. Could be by, you know, making use of the setting in some way. It could be with signage. It could be, you know, there's a number of ways to achieve that. So I didn't want to kind of,
Box it
you know,
in.
box, yeah, exactly.
Yep. All right.
Form-based zoning can address some of that too, right? That there's a look we're going for.
Yeah.
So things should look like you've entered the village.
Exactly.
You've noticed that you're no longer on, to your point, you're no longer on a strip mall in South Burlington, you've entered a
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
huge Vermont town.
And so
Right.
maybe there's a better way to say that. I you know, just that, I just kind of pulled that in from the existing
Yeah.
language.
Kate, quick question. This is just for Shelburne Road, right? We're not
Yes.
talking about other entrances to the village, like on Falls Road, or if we're heading.
No,
that
no,
way?
just, no, not so far. I was just kind of focusing, you know, I was using this as my starting point, the old language, and then
Gotcha.
jumping into that. But,
Okay.
it does address that a little bit, and that's an area that I thought we could maybe expand on, because there are other ways to arrive in Shelburne, not just through Route 7, and that's a really good point. So, let's see. Yeah, okay, so the second one just sort of describes what is this place, you know, what are we kind of going for here? And then just to talk about, and some of this language I pulled out of the recent historic preservation guidelines, because that was some great work that was done in that. Some of this is it's paraphrased. Shelburne Village has been shaped over time by the architectural style of individual buildings and the visual pattern of neighborhood streetscapes. Retain and reinforce village character and identity by ensuring that the commercial, residential, mixed-use development and redevelopment is compatible with the village's historic integrity of design, setting, materials, workmanship, and location. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's some reciprocity with that important new addition.
Could we say preserve and reinforce?
Sure,
Or is that
yeah.
too strong to you? I don't think it'll be too strong
No,
to you.
no, it won't be.
To anybody? Preserve, okay.
How ticky-tacky do you want the comments to be? I mean, there's just little,
Anything,
okay,
anything.
well, I'm just
yeah.
thinking like, I was an English teacher, so I'm looking at like the period
for
should
it.
be inside the quotes. You've got village.
Oh, did I?
We-
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
you've got,
So, he's our new man.
yeah, you've
Yeah,
got a
yeah.
capital V and a small v and the village, you know.
Yeah,
just
go
like-
for it, yeah, yeah.
So.
This was done a little, you know,
Right.
this afternoon, so,
But we want
I
those.
mean, I
But
can-
yeah.
We
I can-
want-
I can do that.
Yeah, yeah.
perfect,
We don't have-
yeah.
So
that.
just very quickly on that point, one thing I think I mentioned in an email to Kate, does the group have any interest in editing a document or a version online so that it's posted? It would have a link to it so people could see, but that would give Andrew the chance to be a teacher.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we talked about that, right?
We
The
did.
Google Docs idea?
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I don't have,
sure.
yeah,
Okay, so,
I would prefer, I mean, I think that would be great, right? It's
yeah.
Easier sharing and people could see.
Commenting.
Could also save time in
Yeah.
these sessions, I think.
Yeah, so, okay, so we will start to do that. We'll figure out how we will do it, but we will start to do that.
Okay, that means I have to get things done before the afternoon before the meeting,
Well, it just means
or an
that
hour
it's,
before the meeting.
right, but it means
Yeah.
that there can be comments where, you know, Andrew will say, well, I'm gonna go through this and do those kinds of edits, and anyway.
So, let's see, yeah, and then, you know, I thought it was important to say something about the public spaces.
mhm.
And the previous iteration was kind of repetitive and went into a lot about what should be done based on this master plan, and I thought, why don't we just reference it, and that's good enough. And then I just, in terms of infrastructure investments, I kind of reiterated a little bit of what those would be. And I also put sidewalks up in infrastructure, because I am completely sick of sidewalks being seen as an amenity or a luxury. They need to be something that, we need to have streets that everybody can use safely, in the village at least. So, and then just make the point that the scale and design of buildings and street amenities shall enhance the experience, comfort, and safety of pedestrians in the village area. So, you know, this is a place where social gathering and the ability to park once, get out and walk around is what we're after. Let's see, and then talking about connectivity, expanding the pedestrian network, with having more routes to get around in the village and connecting the village to surrounding areas. And then a little bit of information on street intersections, and that was, I wasn't sure, but that could be referenced, you know, like
Yeah.
in some way. That seemed, that was just, some of that stuff was in there. But and I did actually edit it down. And then one of the things that it talked about was crossings at signalized intersections. It went on and on about those. And I thought, well, you know, on Falls Road, we have a mid-block intersection crossing that is being piloted, and there's being one piloted, I believe, on Marset too. And so, you know, we need to think more expansively, I think, about that. But again, that might be something that could just, you know, a reference to the Public Works standards.
Currently, the public works specs don't go that far.
I know, that, I mean, you know.
Well, that could be one of the more tactical
Yeah,
recommended actions that we get into.
that's true. I mean, yeah,
Right.
maybe this is just, the first sentence is sufficient and, you know, we don't get into the how so much.
Mm-hmm.
And then integrating the Shelburne Museum and the cluster of town buildings on the west side of Shelburne Road. So the original comments had them separated out, and I thought that since they are both on the same side of Shelburne Road, and Shelburne Road is such a kind of chasm to get across, it made sense to speak of them at the same time. Also because this summer, they are actually being connected with the last little segment of sidewalk. So, so it's, you know, part of what I was trying to do is help people paint a picture in people's minds when they're reading, like what are we talking about, like doing discrete areas. And then I added a few things of my own, you know, strengthen visual links and functional connections with sidewalks, crosswalks, landscaping, and public art. And that could just maybe be strengthen visual and functional connections, period, and we don't get into what
No,
that
I like
is.
that. Well, it helps people think about what we mean there.
Okay.
Well, you could
Alright.
just, yeah, if you note it parenthetically like you do up above, it's
Yeah.
more consistent
Okay.
stylistically, and then it's more like an example rather than a direct.
Right.
Okay. Okay, and then number 8, this is all me. Dean is frowning. Town
Dean doesn't pass judgment.
I'm just trying to read it.
Town
This is getting
officials-
interesting.
Pensive.
Town officials should consider adopting Shelburne Road with the historic village as a Class 1 highway. Are you listening, Select Board? The future success and prosperity of Shelburne Villages hinges on Shelburne Road, currently a state highway, becoming a safe and attractive street. You know, so not a highway, a street. Municipal ownership of Shelburne Road would enable the community's vision to take precedence over state-determined priorities such as vehicular levels of service. So I think that's important to have in there that, you know, at some point, it might make sense to do this. And, you know, and I realize that right now, the incentives from the state do not make it attractive to do this, but that could change, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
Where I think as a state, you know, evolving towards a recognition that we need to be able to, at least in our historic centers, have more than cars getting around everywhere that way.
If I could just interject quickly on that, and Lee may be aware of some of this as well. When you say within the historic village, that makes me think of a pretty small area. And one of the things I understand about the financial pros and cons is that you might actually find yourself better off in a situation where you have a slightly larger area and you get more aid if you have a small area that has cash-intensive features like bridges and signals. If you talk about the historic village, I'm thinking of a small area that's going to have a signal and maybe a bridge, and the numbers just might not be very attractive. But if it's larger or longer, the numbers might start to balance out.
Okay, do you have a thought as to
Well,
what we
it's just,
might?
you may simply want to exclude
The
the.
width
Within
of the
the
village,
historic
okay.
village.
Within the historic
Yeah.
village.
Okay,
Yeah.
And do you,
Like that.
Lee, have you had any exposure to that by osmosis in your office? To that?
Yes. Your premise is sound, that a longer stretch might become more advantageous. It raises interesting questions of, yes, thank you, maintenance and all the rest, but I think it's well worth considering as a possibility and exploring that avenue, see what the ramifications, pros and cons might be. Sometimes the state actually is happy to let a town take over, and they're willing to help make that a good deal.
well, especially given, now that you mention it, especially given the study that's currently being done from Marset down to the
Gateway.
Teddy Bear, the
Yeah, the
Gateway
Gateway.
study. So, you know, there's a lot of interest in trying to, you know.
And Lucy Gibson, who did the study and the financial model for the state on whether or not towns should do this, is the consultant for the Gateway, and I believe
Yeah.
she's crunched some of those numbers.
Oh,
as part of
good,
that
okay.
document. So you
That's
make
on
it-
the agenda next.
It is on the select
the
board
next
agenda,
select-
yeah,
Yeah.
coming up.
Yep. So this is one that would make for interesting discussion at the select board. And it's also one that we might consider signaling. We had talked about this. We'll start to develop a list of things that,
Yeah.
you know, from a policy perspective, might be a shift that we want to socialize. I feel like this is one that would be good for us to elevate sooner rather than later if there's consensus. Yeah, just to socialize a little sooner rather than later.
So, and then item 9, the Shelburne Falls area is a distinct historic area, shall be reinforced. And that was just kind of, you know, as a compact mixed-use neighborhood linked to the rest of the village by pedestrian ways and sidewalks. That was pulled out of the existing language. But I think your point about the, you know, the entrance is a great one, which I think is a little beyond the village, but I've always thought that, you know, coming down Irish Hill and that wonderful meadow that we had the big fight about a couple years ago on the left is, you know, somebody from the 19th century would recognize where they were, you know, coming into Shelburne, and that's incredibly special. I don't think the same could be said, certainly not coming in from the north. And less and less so from coming in from the south, too. But, so that's like a really important gateway that I think is worth preserving or making the case for it. You know, maybe some of that open space money, you know, to try and buy some of that land. So that, I don't know, that might be something to kind of expand on. Just note that it's an important gateway or something.
So could you attach that in item 1? You know, so instead of semicolon, maybe there's a new sentence at the end about creating clear identical entrance to the village, north, south, and
Yeah.
east,
Yeah, uh-huh.
or something to that
That's a
effect.
good idea, yeah, north, south, and east. And then we just get rid of, well, I guess we still keep the Shelburne Falls area
You could
stuff.
say clear identical entrances to the village, you know, especially north, south, and east,
Mhm.
because there's
Yeah.
potentially other ways one might approach it, but those
Yeah,
are the 3 clear ones.
okay.
May I ask a question? If the town took over
Please.
Route 7, what would, if the town took over Route 7 from the state, what would the town do differently than the state is doing now?
What could the
What-
town do? What are the
What could?
advantages?
What would be the advantage then? What would be driving us to do that?
Well, we would have a lot more control. Right now, we have no control. So, I mean, just simple things like if the paving becomes, wears off, you know, the striping on the paving wears off, we're not allowed to do anything. We have, the state does everything with that. So we would have a lot more control over those kinds of things. We could plant street trees, for example. We could put in sidewalks. We wouldn't have to, you know, ask for their permission to do a lot of things. We could install different lighting. We would control the right-of-way.
Did the state ever tell us no?
Yes, they do all the time.
I hate that.
Yeah.
But
But we
maybe
could
for
have,
reasons I don't.
we could have, you know, I mean, I think it might even extend to things like, at, you know, Kevin's Coffee Shop, there could be outdoor seating on the sidewalk, you know? I mean, that's actually in the right-of-way right now, you know, so, you know, there would be.
The town would take over the right-of-way?
Yes, maintenance of the right, so what would
Yeah.
happen, the town would receive money from the state to, you know, take over maintenance.
Every time I've seen the town take over everything, my bills went up. Like the sewer
Well-
department, you know,
Well, that's
stuff
why
like that.
there needs to
That's why-
be a discussion about what are the benefits, what are the costs, and is it worth it in the end to have, you know, having greater kind of community character and maybe more ability to get bridge across Route 7? Are those things worth it enough to us that we would want to consider doing this? So it's a complex question, but it's something that should be considered, I think.
I just didn't realize they told us no. And I don't know what they tell us no to, but it just struck me curious. Thank you.
Mhm.
So last one here is village conservation.
Yeah, that was just taken completely out of the
Okay,
old,
that's the old one.
the old thing, yeah. And I just shortened it a little bit. So yeah, so this is just kind of a first stab, and I think it can be a lot pithier and probably more well-organized. But I was trying to take the best of what was in the 14
Consolidate.
objectives and just, try to
One of the goals was simplification, so removing 4 items is a
I
step in
know,
that
not
direction.
quite as much
It's hard,
simplification as
right?
I was hoping for, but,
Okay.
and, maybe there could be a way to sort of bullet some of these things even, just make it easier to read. But anyway, if you guys agree that, more or less the content is looking okay and you like the
Definitely.
context approach, it could be for each bullet, there has to be the first sentence is the context statement, and then, the rest is what the reaction is to it, or the objective is based on that.
I like it.
Just as a thought, because we're going to hit this on a lot of other sections as well, and we've got objectives and recommended actions. I think it was at one of your suggestions, in terms of adding context as an example, I'm not sure it's the right thing to do, but perhaps have the objective and then under that have some recommended actions so that everything is together. Just a thought, because right now, the way we have objectives and then later we have our recommended actions, and we've been talking about putting those in an appendix,
Yeah.
which would greatly reduce the volume of the document, but it could reduce it to the point where it's just putting it someplace else that you'd need to go reference, and you wouldn't necessarily always do that. So, I'm not sure what it would look like, but a thought.
I mean, if it's an online document too, right, you have much more control over a Word document or a paper document, so you could have things that open and close, so it could be like, objective number 1, recommended actions, and then that could open on the page,
Yeah,
and then there's
blow
your
up.
action to close. So it's sort of something that is dynamic web. I mean, just having spent some of my time as a web developer, you could do a lot more things on the internet than you could on a piece of paper. They could make that document. So in a printed version, you might have your objectives and then recommended actions under each one, but on the web, it could be something that someone could open and close, so that it's aesthetically, you could skim through it and then pick the recommended actions that you wanted to look at, skip ones you didn't. So.
Yeah, I like that.
So that takes us to, assuming the group is generally comfortable with Kate's work here, which it sounds like we are. I guess we turn to, do we turn to recommended actions? I guess we may as well consider that, right? Since that's sort of where this leads us, as to the conversation we are having now. Do we want to try to reshape this and start to articulate recommended actions for each objective, or do we want to work through the current recommended actions, which don't quite translate one-to-one to objectives necessarily? Some of them are higher level.
One way to do it would be to we can go through them, but as we talk about each one, note on this
Which number it
which
might,
Yeah, we
objective
could do
Yeah,
that.
then
That's
it might
a good
pertain
idea.
so that
to.
as you create it,
Yeah.
yeah.
you've got linkages you've created.
And I like the idea of just the bullet, the recommended action is the bullet, and it makes it just really
Yeah.
straightforward and
Yep.
pithy.
All right. Can we put those up on the screen, maybe? Dean, that would be great.
And if you want I can jump in to just
Yeah,
to recap that what I understood
that'd be great.
my task to be was to go through and focus on updating the language to account for the fact that certain things had been done. So maybe a recommended action would be edited down because something that the existing plan calls for doesn't need to remain, although I didn't do that universally. If it was something that might continue or need to be updated on it, I might have retained it. I have to also say that I did this long enough ago that I may misremember some things, so the words will have to speak for themselves. You had hopefully an opportunity to look at it, but in terms of recommended action 1, I felt that since it's addressing both the zoning and the subdivision bylaws, or it makes sense to mention the subdivision
Mhm.
regs. That's kind of a cleanup edit. I just weeded out some words that I thought could be removed, just because that's the direction that you had started to go in last time. The last portion of the document the last portion of that particular recommended action is more heavily edited. It makes reference to the fact that, a form-based zoning and transit-oriented development may be considered. So anyway, it's those kinds of edits. I didn't do the kind of critical thinking that Kate did in terms of, there was, in the time since then, something has arisen, or it's a trend, or what have you, and so I think, Dean, I think it should go in. I leave that for you. So. And I did this for the recommended actions in this section and the following.
So why don't we just work through these? The zoning one looks pretty benign to me. I don't think does anybody have objections to these edits? Okay. Second item is minimally edited in the more detailed streetscape improvement plans.
Yeah.
That looks fine. Item 3, joint
Yes.
promotion between the museum and village.
Basically pulled those bullets in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you could, joint promotion would be
Consolidating.
the only thing left, right? We've already talked about integrate the museum into the village area.
Yeah.
A little redundant from the objective. And again, if you could tie the action to the objective, that would be a
Yeah.
simple bullet underneath
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
joint promotion or.
So strike from between on. Just leave it joint promotion period. Is that what I was
Yeah.
hearing?
Yeah, just under.
Yeah, I mean, I think that bullet that had been edited out would be all that you really need left, right?
And we might want to say, because it's in the same statement, for now at least, as I've related the museum and the cluster of town buildings, we
Right.
might want to say something about the town center, the municipal, the proposal that is moving forward, is my understanding, to consider a library renovation and kind of redo of the town center.
This east-west idea that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
All right, good to get that.
And I don't know what you'd call that, just, continue to identify opportunities to integrate the municipal center complex or something with the rest of the town or something like that. I don't know.
And that'd be all part of number 3. That's what we're saying.
That's what I understand.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Number 4, some minor edits to the bus shelters. Looks fine. Section 5.
Also, I guess one question on 4 is, is the objective to get more bus stops or to improve the bus stops that we have? Because this seems to indicate both. Adding bus stops and making them more friendly. I mean, I don't know, is the objective to add more stops? It seems like,
I interpret the current language as to be calling for both.
Yeah,
but if
so
the-
do I.
if
I
the
mean, there
group
has
doesn't-
been discussion in that southern
Um,
entrance
Right.
review
creating-
about additional bus stops for teddy
Right.
bear.
And if the speed lowers, then you
Exactly.
could have it.
Yeah.
is Teddy Bear considered the village?
I don't know.
Well, in the area.
That's a good point.
In the area near Shelburne Green,
Uh-huh.
the.
No, I understand, but I mean, this specifically calls out bus stops throughout the village.
Right, and so what I'm trying to do is
Yeah.
to say that, by some people's definition, the village would include Shelburne Green. It would be
Okay.
at the southern
Yeah.
edge. And in connection with Shelburne Green, there had been talk about creating a bus stop, but one of the issues is that there isn't room for the buses to pull over, given the prevailing speed. So if the speed was to be reduced, then it would be possible for a bus station to be created. So it's an idea that some people have said they like, another bus stop there. It's
Mhm.
just not easy to implement it, given the speed limit, because CCTA has a policy, they don't put them in unless the speed limit is, I think, 35 or below.
And if,
Interesting.
going back to Kate's point, if you then take over the road from the state, you have more control over
Yeah,
that
but
too?
speed limits are a bit different than the rest of the things. Crosswalks is an area where we would have greater authority. The speed is something that would become a little bit more difficult, but perhaps.
Okay,
We could make changes to the road
We could make like a
itself
slip
that
lane
would
or
justify a
something.
lower
Yeah.
speed.
Yeah.
right.
Without any changes to the road, if cars are going faster, we can't arbitrarily lower the speed limit.
Yeah. But the right-of-way is, what is it, like 100 feet?
99 feet.
It's 99 feet. So there might be room to kind of reconfigure what's there now to include like a little slip lane, so there would be a little pull-off.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you're right, it does
Right.
matter.
Everybody okay with that notion of
yeah, I mean, I think if the
Additional
village is,
bus stops? Yeah.
if the village is defined as Felino's Green Business Park up to where, what would be the north end of the village, Dean, in that?
To the north end? Well, I mean, we are talking about
Bridge,
something
right.
where the word village, the Shelburne Green complex is technically in a different zoning district.
Yeah,
So there's kind of the layperson's idea of the village, and then
So
there's.
how about if we
Right.
solve that by just saying throughout the village and directly adjacent, in areas directly adjacent to the village or something like that?
Wasn't this the map?
Yes, and that
Yeah.
includes the Shelburne family housing property, but doesn't go south of Sinisher.
Yeah.
Got it.
Does that make sense to just say through the village? Because we talk in the objectives about having it be a priority to, blah, 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 where is it? Enhance pedestrian accessibility within and to the village, connecting the village to surrounding areas and/or facilities. So it would seem like you could add a simple throughout the village and in areas, immediately adjacent or something.
well, we talked about calling out specific, what was the language we used? Identifiable entrances, you could even
Mhm.
tie it back to that, so.
Yeah,
Say-
Pedestrian-friendly bus stops throughout the village,
Village and gateways?
and its gateways, and its
Okay.
entrances.
Yeah.
and gateways, great, that's great. And maybe we use that language gateways instead of identifiable entrances. Maybe we switch that. What do you think? In one, we talk about it at gateways, and then it's sort of
I like that.
consistent. And that sounds more dramatic than identifiable entrances.
And it's one word,
What is?
And
oh,
it's
it is
one word.
Okay,
right?
I think.
We're going from 2 words to 1.
Yeah,
so
all
it's a-
right, yeah.
If we bring the bus down to Shelburne Green, is there still a requirement that we then go to Wake Robin? Wasn't there something about?
Well, there's already a bus that goes along Route 7 to Teddy Bear. So the route does go along Route 7, and that wouldn't change. The point that, or the issue that Dick is pointing out is that when bus service is expanded, when fixed route service is expanded, along with it goes an obligation to provide paratransit within a half a mile of that fixed route line. And so if we were to be putting new fixed route service in an area, there's a financial implication because we have to provide paratransit. And I think, Dick, what you're getting to is that there had been a select board discussion a few years ago about the jump in the paratransit costs, but those do tend to go up and down, and we're not talking about any additional area. So anything that's already needs to be served by paratransit would be the same after this, because we're not going into a new territory.
So it's already required. Section.
We are obligated to, if we have the fixed route service, there has to be the paratransit within the half mile.
Okay. So that brings us to recommended action 5.
And,
You want to talk us through that edit, Dean?
okay, so let me just get there.
Pedestrian circulation, 88 Village
Right.
Plan, 06
Just
update.
let off with the main point,
Mm-hmm.
shorten it.
Just take that sentence out, rest it out.
I mean, I think that was the sense, is that, just more direct, boom,
Yeah.
in the recommended
Mhm.
actions is what people were looking
You
for.
have to specify when you say priority pedestrian improvement should be implemented as soon as possible. Would a reader know what those are?
In an earlier version of the plan, yes.
Okay.
There was, at one point in time, well, yes, and a modified yes. There are 2 maps that are part of the comprehensive plan that list priority improvements. So the question is answered in part by those maps. And then there used to be a table, it was called Table 16, and that also listed, but one of the last go-rounds, that table came out.
Okay. I guess I'm just in terms of language, you
Yeah,
could
and-
note that those could be found in section whatever.
If there is a table that goes back in, then it may have even in the past referenced Table 16, and it didn't get edited beyond that.
Okay.
So can we check on that, on those?
Well,
Do we know they're in there?
well, there are still
tables,
maps.
okay.
And so if we have new maps, then you could make reference to those maps, but we don't know what the maps are going to be yet.
Yet,
I think
okay.
you just,
And-
in terms of like an editable doc, if you just have a note saying,
Yeah.
you know,
We have to revisit
yeah,
that.
reference.
Right.
Reference.
Reference.
Somehow in final edit, so we're.
Reference
Whether it's-
maps, however we refer to those maps.
The maps number 16 and 17 or whatever it is.
Yeah. Just so we know we have a bracket or something, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? A placeholder for these. Landscaping, let's see. Okay, comprehensive, multi-year looks fine. More specifically, first bullet.
I did mention the street tree management plan, Lee.
Thank you, I saw that. Tree committee will be very good.
Yes, they will be.
But it's good, it's good to reference
Right.
other work that's been done.
Absolutely.
Sure, this integrated.
Acknowledge it. Okay. First bullet looks good. Everybody good with that? Okay, second bullet. Village Green. Just taking out some language there. Looks okay.
The only question I guess I would have as a reader of that is, you're kind of like,
Second bullet?
yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so you recommended this going back to, in some cases, 19-something, and now 2006. Like, what are they? Are there specific circulation improvements that are worth
within that
noting-
document.
Worth noting right here, you know, highest priorities are BAM, you know, or something to that effect.
I would just say something like, develop and implement a design for landscaping the triangular village green as a focal point in the village, and then skip all the way to connecting it visually to other areas of the village and functionally to the pedestrian walkway network. And that's the, boom, you're done. Because otherwise, we just reference the plan, I mean, we reference that in the objective section. Right, under,
Right.
Did we?
does that make sense? Yeah, under,
Oh, yeah, that number 4. Parade ground landscape master
yeah, under
plan.
number 4, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, no, I like that idea too.
So can you run that by me again, or maybe?
So just say, okay, so develop and implement, focal point in the village, comma, and then take everything out and start up with connecting it visually to other areas of the village and functionally to the pedestrian walkway network. So that's like, you know, what we're trying to do this.
That's the action.
Yeah, that's the action.
Okay. Did you get that,
I
Marianne?
did not get that, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
So are you, what's,
So-
you're in the second
We're on bullet 2.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we're taking out consistent with recommendations contained within the 2006 Village Plan Update and Village Green and Parade Ground Landscape Master Plan and subsequent updates this may involve. We're
Okay, so-
taking all that out.
Okay. So how are you starting that bullet though, with implement?
Yeah, develop and implement a
So
design.
you're keeping develop?
Yeah, for landscaping the triangular village green as a focal point in the village, comma, connecting it visually to other areas of the village and functionally to the pedestrian walkway network.
Where do I see, I don't see the connecting it though.
It's
Well,
been crossed
It's in
out,
that,
Oh,
resurrecting it.
oh, sorry.
I said develop, I see develop and implement landscaping. Yeah, I don't know what you.
It's been,
landscaping and circulation
It's
improvement.
this part right here, connecting, right?
Oh, connecting it visually, okay, I see that, so you're, so. try it
We're,
one more time.
we're
Develop it-
reinserting that deleted language.
Keeping this, the connecting, okay. So develop and implement, go ahead.
Design for landscaping.
Yeah,
and circulation improvements on the triangular village green as a focal point in the village, comma, and then jumping right to connecting.
okay, got it.
So that's the point, that's why we're doing this too, for this
Yeah.
purpose.
Okay. Good on that. 3rd bullet.
Develop
we
and
need
implement
that.
designs for, how about taking out landscaping, because that sounds like super, sort of suburban shopping center-ish. Develop and implement designs for the village, you know, gateways to the village? Should we just
Yeah.
say that?
Mm-hmm.
The intent is to visually differentiate the village from the surrounding areas, as well as to announce arrival into the village. I think that's good.
Did you get that, Marianne?
So the only thing missing there is the Southern Gateway report that
Oh,
should
so
be
we should
done by the
add-
time,
Yeah.
certainly will be done by the time we
And Southern Gateway Report, yeah,
finish this. Yeah.
okay.
Okay. 7 hasn't changed. 8 we took care of because we've done that work. Street lighting. Wayfinding, emphasis on continue to implement since we've done some. Parking.
That study is on the list to be done and may be done by the time
Mhm.
the plan is ready, in which case you could leave it out.
Okay.
Yep, utility lines. Good with that, I think we should keep that in there somehow.
I think the parking thing should take into account anticipated parking needs in the village, you know, and look at scenarios where we're increasing bicycle and pedestrian access. So it's not just, we're not just like increasing, the goal shouldn't be, this reads as if we want to make more parking. I think it should be a really, you know, a look at how, you know, a sort of unbiased look at the issue of parking.
In the sense of adding multimodal
Yeah.
parking, like bike parking?
And
you're
then,
talking about?
and then there's bike parking too, yeah, so I mean, it's just parking for, it's all car oriented again.
And maybe it would have helped if I had actually had it deleted and then made the note that, well, this
Yeah.
deletion hinges on the report being done.
Okay.
But, I mean, I'm sensitive to Kate's point, that it seems like it's just
Is that
all
what that
vehicles.
study is addressing?
It is multimodal. If it, yeah, it's been a long time since I've looked at the proposal, but it is more multimodal, or I hope will be more multimodal than the 2000 study was. But the 2000 study was not a bad study. I'm just thinking that this language might kind of give you more of a sense of the vehicle orientation than was actually there.
Yeah.
Because it did talk about transit, it did talk about connections and linkages between different parts of the street.
All right, let's bracket that one for now.
Okay.
Utility lines we're good with. 11 is an official map, which,
Can I just make a suggestion about utility?
please, wait.
Maybe it already incorporates it, but just remember the possibility of backlotting utility lines. Undergrounding is often what we reach for, but it's extremely expensive. And the utility companies understandably are not enthusiastic about that. Although it lessens damage from trees and ice storms, it does make maintenance dramatically more challenging. Sometimes you can accomplish the same goal, doesn't always work, by negotiating easements and getting utility lines behind buildings, effectively hiding them but keeping them above the ground.
Yeah.
So just,
Yeah.
the concept of hiding them is great, but there may be different approaches that make it more able to actually happen.
Isn't that what the text I highlighted gets at? I think that's the intention, moving overhead lines away from the street rights of
So
way.
maybe it says that, but just want to make sure you
Mm-hmm.
keep that in mind.
Can we just
Having
add,
worked
you know,
with those issues.
backlotting? Is that a term of art, or is that,
With, yeah, I mean, if we can,
I'm good, either
What
way.
does mid-block location mean in that one highlighted?
well, it's some place that is not, it would be midway between the frontage. If we assume, and, you know, big assumption, that the land is developed in a.
Are you saying like, instead of the street, mid-block away from the street
Right,
versus
so it'd be-
mid-block? Right,
It's in the rear, it's in the rear yards, it's
Okay.
in the back lot.
right.
Yeah. Okay. Official map?
Opposed?
Yes, I know. Dick,
Support,
Wait, what did Dick say?
I'm teasing
he said
you.
opposed.
Yeah.
It says research. Dick, you're opposed to research?
We've researched it out.
Yes.
We need to do more research.
Why the opposition?
Can you just give for the group
It's a sadly
a minute drill on
misunderstood.
what an official map is and why
Yeah.
there's
Official map is
tension?
one of the tools that the state planning law gives to municipalities that want to plan their futures. It's one, like I was starting to say, it is sadly misunderstood. It's often portrayed as something that is taking property away, when all that it does is give the community the opportunity to say where it thinks a street network should be, and if there's development in an area that's shown as a street, then a couple of things happen. A developer will see the community's interest in having the street in that location, and they will accommodate it. They'll say, yeah, the town plans a street here, and they'll incorporate that location. Or they will cross their arms and say, well, no, I don't want to do a street here. I think it's a dumb idea. And what it does is it forces the community to decide, does it want to implement that street or not? But there's no taking of property. It's just another planning tool where the community, if it's really serious about its street system, it has an opportunity to lay out the location and to implement it. It's not limited to streets. It is often used for other types of facilities and things that you might have read about. Heinsberg has one, South Burlington has one. They use them for other facilities, but they tend to be most controversial when they involve streets.
This came up in the bike ped trail conversation at some level.
Well, South Burlington uses their official map, or has in the past, with bike ped facilities. I don't know that official map came up much here when the PADS committee did its map.
I thought that,
It increases, on the plus side, it increases predictability about outcomes and what is intended. And frankly, we have an official map in this town. It's called the form-based zoning. That's what the regulating plan is. It is a mini version of the official map. So, and that goes much farther than an official map would, actually.
That's what popped into my head, is because we have areas that say, depending on how this develops out, this would be a consideration for
Yeah.
retain a consideration for a road or a path or whatever.
Right.
I think one of, official maps are worth a half-hour discussion in and of themselves, if it's something that you want to get into more.
So I'm interested in hearing Dick's opposition now that we've gotten.
Yeah,
three
which is why I
pro
think we need to
arguments.
give Dick
Yeah.
good, full
Yeah,
stage.
yeah.
I think it is a take. You can have a trail put across, a proposed trail put across your backyard, and once it's there, you can't remove it. It will show up on bank documents if you're getting a mortgage. There are instances where that has occurred, and it,
And
in
that's the
general, I
argument.
don't,
that's the argument that came up in the
Mhm.
Boulder Hill Collimer Circle trails.
Right.
I
The
didn't hear that
takings
one,
argument, yeah.
but, and that's one reason I think we should go slowly with form-based zoning. I think we need to see how it works, and it is a good idea in an area that we want to redevelop, but I don't know that form-based zoning is a good idea in developed neighborhoods.
Fair enough, so,
Thank you.
and it does say, research the pros and cons, benefits and impacts, for what it's worth. So 12 here, La Platte Nature Park, management, I don't think anyone will object there. Keep that in. Maintain our designated village center and Vermont neighborhood designations,
I
which
had-
we will do.
Question about that. I know we have the neighborhood area, development area is the Harrington Village area. Now, since the development is complete there, do we still maintain that, or?
It's still on a map. It could be modified. There's sort of a budget for the amount of area that could be incorporated, and that budget wasn't maxed out, so it could be potentially expanded.
Because I was wondering if that would be a way to foster more of the kind of this idea of trying to expand the village character out beyond the village, like making that connection to the area that we want to kind of integrate with the southern part of the form-based code area.
Yeah, I think,
I
would
know
need
you have to get around some topographical obstacles and things, but
Yeah,
it just
I-
seemed like kind of maybe,
There are size limitations, and I think there's a contiguity requirement. Looking over at my fellow planners, the Vermont neighborhoods, could you have multiple Vermont neighborhoods that either of you guys know? That were not. Okay, so it may be possible that it would be someplace in addition to,
Yeah.
not connected.
yeah. Just to incentivize some of the form-based code stuff that we want to see happen.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The,
Possible to
well, the
game the
Vermont
system a
neighborhood
little bit.
designation, if I'm remembering it correctly, is really providing more incentives for people doing residential.
Individual project basis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, nobody figures it out in advance.
All right, so we're through growth area 1, recommended action edits. We have Kate's updates to the objectives in growth area 1. We had a conversation, not a decision yet, on potentially reconfiguring recommended actions against individual objectives. I don't know, I think we should continue that conversation and continue this process of let's make notes of what makes sense, recommended actions for which objective, if everybody's good with that, until we sort of align on, yes, this new structure works.
And maybe it can be a template for how we do things.
Maybe,
Yeah,
yeah.
in other
I have
sections.
it
Yes,
online.
please.
I mean, I've got it on this machine.
Oh, hey, Susan.
Susan Meganberg, Natural Resources and Conservation Committee. I actually wanted to suggest an additional recommended action in this section.
Please.
And this refers to the village portion, but will apply for the other districts as well. And just to open up by reminding everybody that all town land sits in some watershed. And so thinking about what's underground and where stormwater is going is really critical. And it's probably even most critical in the village center because there's so much impervious surface. And because the entire area of the village from Bostrick Road down to the traffic light, including Shelburne Museum land, so all that town, the major town, that stretch, all that water, when it rains, goes into stormwater catchments and pipes, and then enters a pipe at the intersection with Harbor Road, and then goes directly into McCabe's Brook near the dog park. That's a huge volume of water. It's not clean water. It's not treated at all. So McCabe's Brook, as you know, is now phosphorus impaired and very well may become stormwater impaired, which we know, don't quote me on that, but the way things are going. So it's in our interest as a town to try to prevent that as much as possible. So if the town could take over that portion of Shelburne Road, boy, that would give us tremendous opportunity to put stormwater infrastructure in the right-of-way, for example.
So that is controlled by the state as well. Even, I mean, it's almost like a section underneath the street. Everything
Yes.
below
Everything below.
Route 7 is controlled by the state too. Wow. That's a big deal.
Yeah, so perhaps just another recommended action regarding stormwater management in the village area. Some example-specific requirements or bullet points that I just came up with that could be done. Storage of rainwater from rooftops. So that's an inexpensive retrofit. We could put a rain garden in a portion of the village green to intercept some of the water. We did a rain garden on Brook Lane for under $20,000 last year. You could limit or ban the use of fertilizers and pesticides on town land. Those are easy changes that actually, because of that volume of water, would make a big difference. That's all I'll say now, I guess, but I'll end with just saying, how can we as a committee help
Yeah,
integrate
great.
this into the plan?
So we should, I think, well, for starters, we could, on item 8 of the objectives, we could say, so I had said, would enable the community's vision to take precedence over state-determined priorities, such as vehicular levels of service, and we could add stormwater treatment and how stormwater is treated and managed, you know? I mean, because I think that's really significant, that all of that, we're obliged to deal with the mitigation of stormwater that we don't have any control over, that's being, you know, how it's produced. You know, we have to pay for the management of it. So I think that's really significant. Yeah. Wow, I had no idea. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. It's incredible.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great call out.
Yeah.
Do we have you jotted down the The notes
get
there.
the notes and
Yeah,
check with Mary
exactly.
Ann. But what I'm understanding is that Kate is going to try to incorporate those into the objective 8. So that's, I'm just carrying on the edits to the
Okay.
objectives.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Susan.
Thank you.
Okay, so,
Although I guess what I'd say is that I wouldn't want to make stormwater management contingent on adopting Shelburne Road. I think that should be a priority regardless of how that plays out.
Yeah. No, it's
So-
just, I was just citing it as one of the advantages, you know,
Yeah,
that
right.
we
No, but I
hadn't
mean, we-
realized, yeah.
If you add it to bullet point 8, you know, it looks like it's
yeah, no, I'm,
connected to adoption versus is it a,
number 14.
It's a contingent of that.
It should be a new 14, right?
well, we only have 10, right? I'm talking about objective,
Objective.
like, I think it should be an objective.
Oh, I see what
and-
you're talking
that's what
about.
Kate was
And a,
So stormwater should be an addition, we should have an additional objective, basically.
Yeah, that's what I
Right.
thought you said.
that would be my,
So
Okay.
you're not editing number 8 to say, and how
sta-
stormwater is treated and managed?
well, I think it could be part of that there too, right? So that's just another advantage, but, so whether you want to call it stormwater management before you get to bullet number 8, so there's, you know, the numbers all slide down, but call it
Yeah.
up higher in the list. So
Okay.
it becomes an objective and then it's more clearly, it's easier to then note it as a recommended action later.
Oh, okay, and then it gets sort of referenced in,
Yeah.
in 8. Oh, sort of,
Right.
and by the way, this also plays into this other
Yeah.
goal.
Right.
Okay.
Kate, are you going to draft another objective for stormwater?
Yeah, so I guess I will, yeah, I guess I'll just kind of rejigger these things and then
But
We can
it'll
put
be
'em up on
online soon, so.
Google Docs and Andrew can have at it.
Sounds good.
Make it all pretty and
Polished.
pithy.
Okay. With that, we're through the recommended actions on growth area 1. We have not discussed the vision statement edit, that's in your packets. It's almost 8:30 and we have Brandy here, so I'm sensitive to
Are you staying in town tonight?
spending more time on the vision statement. I think everybody's got the update. We should just provide reactions to Dean if there are concerns, objections. We'll continue to keep that in our packet, I think, as something that just guides our discussions. And we may not spend that much time on it in every meeting, but I think it's important for us just to keep it as part of the packet going forward. We'll jump into growth area 2
Next time.
in the next meeting, if that works for everybody. And from there, we should probably take some time, maybe after Brandy's presentation, just to take another fresh look at section by section, who's doing what and dates.
Yeah, that would be my question is, for the sections I'm in charge of, like, when we think, so we'll.
Yeah, I think
next
we're gonna
meeting-
come back, well, I think what we might do is just since Brandy's here and she's got a bit of a drive, I wanna jump into that, and then maybe we can just, during our wrap-up, other business correspondence, we can just talk about assignments for specific sections and dates when we're thinking we'll address that, guesstimates, exactly. Okay, moving on to agenda item, what was formerly 6, now 7, is a continuation of our discussion of form-based zoning. And we have Brandy Saxton here tonight from PlaySense. We have a big 11 by 17 markup in front of us here. And the goal tonight, we have about an hour, if that's fair, to,
Try to be a little more succinct.
okay, we'll
I see you
do
have other
the.
agenda items. I don't want you here to be
Okay,
either.
well, we'll do the best we can to get through it. So the last conversation we had was at the community workshop, right?
Well,
And- or-
so what you have in front of you is a complete draft. You've seen bits of this, but not everything pulled together. And so I have a couple of things I want to focus in on tonight. I want to just walk you through and sort of highlight the areas where there are major changes so that you know where to turn your attention to. I will be able, for those of you who want to delve into the weeds, get you a track changes version. I have a little bit of, now that we've made it in the pretty version, I have to actually go back to Word and make the changes and keep the two documents cross-referenced. But, so I have just a little bit more to do there. But I can highlight to you where the major changes are. A couple of open issues that we perhaps need to make some decisions on and come back to. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about getting feedback on this draft as well. So I think, unless anyone had immediate questions for me, it makes sense to sort of start with the overall walkthrough. It seems like it's taken a long time to get to this draft. Maybe you feel the same as I do, Alice. It does seem like it has taken a lot. So I'm hoping that one of the main things that was accomplished is not so much a change in content, but that the new layout and just the general editing of the document, and the fact that all of the links are now, if you have the PDF version, you can actually click on things that are red, and it jumps to that part of the document. It is a complex document, and all of these parts obviously link together. So hopefully this helps just in terms of the usability and readability, and trying to identify places where, as you were in the process of adopting this and working on it over such a long period of time, inconsistencies and conflicts kind of got baked in. So a lot of those have been found and changed or fixed. So a lot of that kind of detail work isn't sort of immediately evident in looking at it, but hopefully it makes it a much more usable document going ahead. So I guess the first place I would pause, I mean, we talked the last time I was here about sort of the taking out of some of the background discussion that was in the front that was more educational in purpose than exactly regulatory, and really streamlining that. And so that piece is done. But the regulating plan itself, there has been some discussions of making changes to this. We've talked about the road and whether, so one of the issues that you all need to sort of make a decision on is whether to eliminate some or all of these future roads from the regulating plan, to leave the lines there but change the text that goes along with them to indicate that it needs to be a future connection or, future connectivity, not necessarily a road. We also talked about making the, maybe not going with a road, but going with pedestrian connections. So that's something that we need you guys to make a decision on, so we know how to make adjustments to this map.
I thought we decided that.
Well,
The southern one.
Did we not?
I had the distinct sense that you were going to be taking out the southerly one and that you were going to be making changes to the
Right.
northerly one, but it hadn't quite been nailed down
Okay.
exactly what was happening in the north. But I thought that was the consensus of the group.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection was the southern one was definitely
Oh.
not desired
Oh.
by anybody. It had no value and had severe negative impacts. And then the northern one was potentially looked at as, rather than calling it a road, thinking of it as a place to connect all those neighborhoods to each other and to the, commercial pieces on the front of the street. So it could be a form of a path, but it was,
Yeah.
I mean, again, semantics, I don't know what you'd call it, but desired route of connectivity, that could be, take any mode.
okay. So with that guidance, if that's the agreed upon consensus where you were, I can go in there and work on that.
Are we talking about possibly intertwining the road so it may not be behind certain buildings?
Well,
Or keeping that whole northern route behind the building?
Well, I had thought we agreed that a road wasn't workable given the geography and the current built-out environment, and that we were thinking it was more of a path, some sort of lower impact path, whether it's bike, whether it's pedestrian, TBD. I think people felt like a road just wasn't,
And it wouldn't have to.
within that scale, it wouldn't really work.
Right, it would-
Yeah.
Where applicable.
It could intertwine, come into the front of the building as opposed
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
This,
yeah, the overriding
the delineation isn't
objective
fixed.
was to provide more connectivity, but be kind of opportunistic about how that happened.
Yeah.
Because there are different site conditions, as you've pointed out.
Allowing Brandy to make a
Yeah.
Well, that at least gives me a direction to go to propose the, I think it's probably more, if we eliminate this other one, take that one off the map, leaving some
Right.
version of the line up there, but changing how the map is labeled and described, I think will
Yeah.
probably address that. And then the other thing on this, regulating plan, is the removal of the standards that are overridden by other standards in the regulations. So the building height piece that's on the regulating plan in here and the character districts, I understand why you have it here in terms of trying to speak to what the desired future character is, but the building height is actually regulated by the building type, and it doesn't these are somewhat inconsistent. These numbers that are in here in the regulating plan.
Where are we?
Yeah,
So we're still on
which
the
page?
regulating plan. If you see under the
Okay.
character districts, it has like minimum and maximum heights for
Oh, I
each of
see.
them.
Oh, yeah.
These numbers don't line up with what's in the written text, and they also are not always consistent with what's in the tables for the building types in terms of what building types are allowed in these character districts. So my recommendation is that we take that piece off the regulating plan altogether. We leave the descriptive language in the text, in the narrative about the typical building heights, where I think it's a little bit more clear that it's descriptive language and not solely, not an overriding regulation. So, and then the building heights tables, the building tables, type tables will include the building height
And are you saying,
standards.
take all those sub-bullets out? Or leave build to
I think the build to
zone?
zone one is okay. The build to occupancy is not as much of a problem. It's the building height one is definitely causes conflicts later on.
It's right here, it's in the map.
Yeah, that should be on page 3.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a
I
sort
wonder
of,
if it's cleaner just to take it all out.
well, you do have.
Does it add any value by
I don't think the
having-
build to zone numbers are anywhere else.
Okay.
So, it may be, it might be possible to put them somewhere else, but right now, that's where they are, they're physically on the plan. Also, they're little numbers in black ovals. They're also reprinted in the legend. Yeah.
Build to zone occupancy.
Yeah, the build to zone occupancy piece, I'm trying to go back here and see the building types. Yeah, the building types themselves also have a build to zone occupancy.
That's on the building type,
It's based on the building type.
on the grid,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
already in those grids?
Yeah, I don't think it's as much of a conflict with those, but it does raise the question when someone is looking at this, what is the,
Why are we calling this out in particular?
right,
That's all I
and
think
which
about when I
one
look at the map.
takes precedence? So my recommendation is we try to, for as often as possible, only say things once
Right.
in this document, and not say things in repeated places,
Yep.
because it's just
That
creating the
sometimes
opportunity
conflict.
for conflicts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Everybody okay with that if we delete the build to zone occupancy and the min-max height by character district? It's already elsewhere in the document, so it's surplus here.
Were we saying that those would then be added to that table?
They're already in there.
Yeah, there's a couple of, the building heights are repeated in the actual
By the
written
building
descriptions of the character districts, and interestingly enough, they don't actually align. Because on the plan, it says things like 1 to 3 stories, and in the written text, it says 1.5 to 3.5 stories, and stuff like that. So the half stories somehow got, didn't necessarily always get translated to the plan. And so I think the simplest thing there is to definitely remove the building height,
Yeah,
and I think the
fine. Yeah,
occupancy
go.
is also duplicative. So,
And you suggest leaving the build-to zone in
I
there?
think the build-to zone probably
It's
should
helpful.
stay. It's,
Yeah,
I mean, it's on the map in those little directly, you know, and it's shown by the dotted line that's labeled.
right.
It doesn't hurt to have that one there, because it could be a little bit hard to read on the actual map.
Okay.
And that one is not specified in the building types. So that takes care of that. As we're leafing through the document, the next page I wanted to stop on was page 6. Just to point out that we added the section on bicycle parking and storage. That's a sort of a new, larger chunk of language that got put in here. And then this whole section had a lot of written standards that were in the text that have been taken out and put in the table that follows, so in figure 2202A. So that the table, which has, that's the use table, so when there was a functional standard that applied to that use, it's now in the table. The standards are in the table.
That's great, so it's all in one spot.
It's all in one place.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
So the other, the next thing to point out on page 11, the building materials language is still here. I know that you discussed at a prior meeting to have it taken back out. I was actually in a moving forward and not backwards mode. And so I haven't gone back to necessarily make the changes that you
It's 11.
called for at the last meeting. So I know that you want to have taken back out and just left as a reserved language section. So if you note that in there. And then this section too, the building form and lot development standards, the text portion of it does seem to have been reduced significantly when you see the track changes version. But all of the language that was removed has been combined with the illustrations. And so now the illustrations have the text that related to them directly under them.
Great.
So, picture and text combined, so we're not saying things twice. There will be some more labeling of illustrations, and a few of these illustrations may need to be updated and things like that. So that's some of the work that's going to be coming up next, is to fine tune the illustrations and add a few that were missing or that we added some things to. So, moving, and I think some of these images too, the resolution of the pictures when you actually see them printed out isn't great, but I do have the originals, so I think I'm going to be able to improve on that.
Okay.
It's a matter of
Yeah, that's
figuring
really-
out someone else's filing system.
That is hard to read those.
Yeah, a lot of them, the labels are not very clear, but I
Yeah.
think I can actually get them back out and
Okay.
the originals versions and not the, you put it in Word and then Kate took it out and now it's all pixelated version. So, in terms of the building type tables, there's obviously 11 of these large-scale tables. There has been a little bit of editing in here where there were places that there was a difference between text and table. There were a couple places where, or between two tables. So there were some places where, like under the permitted building types by character district, there was there was incompatibility between the character districts that were listed here, and then back in the very beginning, under figure 2201C, that also lists the building types allowed by character districts. So at this point, those two things should get you the same answer in each case. So that's important. So there was some going back and forth, and Dean and I conferred about that, and I think we captured the intent and figured out that piece. The other element in here that we changed in a couple of places, there was a couple of these building types, I think the commercial ones, that talked about limiting the number of buildings on a lot to 4. And my recommendation here, and Paul's as well, I think we heard this in terms of some of the comments you got from at least one property owner, is that there's already, obviously, properties and developments that have more than 4 buildings on them in the area. And that probably what you were really getting at is that you don't want more than 4 of each building type. So if you have a multi-use site with multiple buildings, you know, if there were multiple building types and there were more than 4 buildings, that would make more sense. If you just got, you know, you might not want a site that has, you know, 10 tech shops on it. But if it had, you know, 3 tech shops and, you know, 2 of your general commercial buildings or something like that, so you're really creating a mixed-use site. So I reworded those to say, where they said that there had been a limit of
What page is
4.
that? What
It's on a
page?
couple of the tables. It's in the general purpose multi-building, multi-purpose general building. It's in the commercial liner building. It's in the tech shop. So it's in the commercial
tech shop.
type buildings. You had that limitation. So if that is not the policy you want to pursue, then,
Where is it? I mean,
You're
can you
in
just-
like a commercial liner building where.
yeah, it's under the additional requirements.
Additional requirements.
Way down in the
maximum number
bottom
of
right-hand
buildings
corner.
On any one lot
Oh, additional down at the bottom here.
Yep.
Okay, uh-huh.
is 4
Yeah.
of this type permitted.
So basically I added the of this type to
Right.
those sections.
Yeah, I do think that's the idea,
You want a diversity,
yes.
yeah.
May I ask a question along those lines as well?
Please, Lee.
If I read it accurately, at the very end of the document, in the waiver section, it appears to require waivers to have more than one principal building on a lot. So if you're talking about the possibility of multiple buildings on a lot, if I understand the conversation accurately, then we may need to make sure those are internally consistent. So we're not saying we can have all these buildings and then saying,
You need a
but you
waiver
really
to do it.
can't without waivers.
Oh,
It isn't, yeah, I mean, it is, I guess, in the waivers section. It says it can be permitted,
2207.5C.
yeah.
I guess my question would be, why do we care? If I can design a project that meets all of these standards, why do we care whether there's 1, 3, or 6 buildings on the lot if I can accommodate all the needs, meet all the standards, and design it in accordance with the code? So why would I need a waiver to do something that maybe makes all the sense in the world?
where is the waiver? Sorry, where?
It's page 56,
Okay.
2207.5C. And I think, it's going back, but I think the idea was just this sort of notion of noise, of parking, of this supplemental layer of review if we start to have this agglomeration of more intensive uses, even though we're not supposed to be talking about uses, there was this sense of, well, if you start putting a tech park and a heavy commercial building, might that cause additional traffic impacts? Maybe, maybe not. What?
Because
And
otherwise I
that's
could
where I
subdivide
see
my
section
land
2, right?
and do
But
the
I agree
same
with
thing.
you, yeah, I mean, if the goal is to accelerate the review and make it clear to applicants, this would give me pause if I wanted to put multiple buildings on a lot.
Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to go.
Oh, no
but,
problem, Kate.
I
Thank
would
you
just
for-
say, let's make it really easy for people to do redevelopment, but just be clear about what it is we want them to achieve.
Yeah.
So, you know, sorry.
So, how do others feel about that point? We set up this process where you can have multiple principal buildings on a lot to really create this
Like a mini village look.
mini village look, right? To have this, more diverse,
Well, it's still controlled with.
but still control it with this waiver.
It's controlled with density too, isn't it? There's a density.
Yeah, that's already in the building type, right?
Yeah, the densities are set elsewhere. I mean, this is a procedural and administrative point, whether the default is that you get to have the multiple buildings if you meet the density requirements, or you have to make your case for them.
Or you risk creating a de facto implicit encouragement to subdivide properties, which now you may need multiple curb cuts and you're working against your own design
Yeah, I agree.
ethos. Because it's easier to.
It does,
design-
yeah,
to
the
master
applicant
plan
will
a
just say,
project.
that's fine, I'll just subdivide it.
Right, and you
and
may end
I'll-
up with the same result, but now you got, it's harder to do the stormwater,
Yeah.
separate curb cuts and parking lots, and it's actually, it might be harder to achieve your goals. So I guess my question is, does it really matter whether I have one building, a series of single buildings on individual lots, or multiple buildings on one lot, if I otherwise meet all of your design criteria? Why does it matter
So the
whether it's?
district is gonna control that as well as density, so there's already controls.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's the approval process that you're talking about, whether it's default, you get to have multiple principal buildings, or you need to get that
Waiver.
additional permission
Yeah.
from the DRB to do it.
Do you recall this? I mean,
Do I recall whether or not the group talked about it?
yeah, I do recall us talking about this, I just can't recall specifically what
Well, what I think
I
might have
think the
happened.
concern was just impacts, right, when we had multiple principal buildings and,
Yeah,
traffic
I think
noise.
what ended up happening was that something that is found in the main zoning regulations was pulled into the form-based zoning, because
Mhm.
our current zoning regulations have this requirement.
right,
So then the question might be, well, why is there this requirement? And I think it reflects a certain school of thought regarding what makes for more orderly land development. And it is, it's not easy to try to describe the philosophy that's embedded in it, but I think the idea summed up in this idea that there's a one-to-one relationship between land uses and the parcel of land that it's on, and that it's more orderly, and that there are times when we'll want to know what's the area associated with that use, and there's no clearer way of knowing what the area is associated with that principal building than having the requirement that it's on a lot. And a lot is defined as the parcel of land, at least sufficient size to meet the zoning requirement. So it's just explicit. And in the early days of zoning and subdivision, I think there was some benefit to that. But as communities got more sophisticated in their regulations and they have things like PUDs, the boards that are reviewing them are understanding the whole development, and you understand what the zoning requirements are and that they're met in the total rather than on any individual building. And so that kind of works against this idea of one primary or principal building and one lot. But it's still there, it's still in our regulations, and I think that Ted and Jim just pulled it in,
yeah.
and that's why it's there. So, is it?
Would that type of development where there are multiple principal buildings go through a traffic study anyway? As part of the application under?
A traffic study? Well, the zoning regulations right now basically say you can't have more than one principal building unless it's in a PUD. And that gets at this idea that a board that's reviewing the development is looking at things in total. So you would not be forced to draw those parcel lines if you take a project through a PUD. So that's the way the existing regulations are. And so the prohibition is only half of it. The prohibition that's pulled into the form-based zoning is only half of it. So again, though, the question is, does this, I mean, I think we can ask Brandy, is there, in 2017, is there still a purpose to be fulfilled by a one principal structure per lot requirement? I mean, you must have seen lots of instances in regulations where that's,
Yeah, typically in a setting where you're trying to encourage higher density mixed use development, I would eliminate it, and allow them multiple principal buildings and uses, and allow the principal, buildings and uses by right. The only caveat I have to this, and I hadn't really given this much thought, because that wasn't one of the areas that we really looked at, the administrative procedures that much, sort of just left those as they were, is that so many, that this form-based code standards run off of buildings and not off of lots. So I'm not sure that it clearly answers the question, and this is something I think we'd have to address in the administrative piece. If you need to have a certain amount of lot width and lot area per building, and you have multiple buildings, I think the lot area one is pretty clear that you would need 5,000 square feet per principal building. But do you need 50 feet of frontage per principal building? If you have a site like this that has multiple buildings, there's often buildings in the front and buildings in the back. Not all the buildings necessarily have any frontage, and you have other, regulations about the build-to zones and stuff that, the underlying assumption of this, and it is one of the challenges, I think, of applying it to some of your existing sites, is that it's one building on a lot, to be honest.
Yeah.
The underlying assumption of the form-based code itself, because it is regulating the buildings and not necessarily the lots, if that makes sense.
it's either a lot or it's just some area that's going to be on a plan somewhere that's like a pseudo lot or a quasi lot. It's something that's going to demonstrate that the standards are met.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that would have to be done would be to make it clearer how some of these standards would be applied to sort of what I would call backlot buildings, right? Because if you had a lot of this type, you wouldn't necessarily want all the buildings to be built to the build-to line. You would,
Right,
yeah. That would mean you couldn't have any back buildings.
yeah.
So I think that it's an issue to think through, maybe, mark that as one of your topics for discussion, and to, the underlying philosophy of, I think that Dean laid out is good. Do you want to see some of these larger pieces more platted out versus being
Yeah.
sort of the planned unit development approach?
It's too bad that Kate had to leave, but
She
the idea of pre-platting was
Yeah.
something that we were talking about.
She's an advocate for platting. I guess just back to Lee's question is, do we see a need for this waiver? Is it something we want to bracket and continue to stew on? The one thing that jumps out in my mind is always just the traffic impacts of a lot with 3 or 4 principal buildings on it. I'm less concerned about noise. I'm not, the other stuff here I think was just carried over from, that's the only piece I'd want to get everybody's temperature on and think
What's-
through before we just,
Is there a square footage maximum regardless of whether it's 1 or 3 or 4, so you might have 3 little buildings or 1 big one?
yeah, how do we,
Well, each building would be subject to the standards for whatever building type it is. So those have, in some cases, there are some I think there are some that have height and there might be some of these that have some limitations. I'm looking at civic buildings, which I
and they're really, I mean, there are a limited amount of sites that this would
Yeah.
apply to, of course, but.
Yeah, so some of
I
these.
mean,
Yeah, some of these building types do have square footage limitations in certain character districts. There's a variety of standards that apply to, each building type.
Just trying to think how you game the system, how you gonna, having been on the other side of the fence for a little bit, like, you're looking at these codes to figure out how can you maximize your thing. yeah, how can you game the system in a way, so,
And where we want to play the game too.
right.
So,
Maybe there's a way that we can require multiple buildings to merge their parking plan to work to the benefit of the district.
Yeah, that should be in here anyway. Don't we have shared parking?
Yeah, there is a shared parking pieces are in there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would be one of the benefits, obviously, of
Exactly.
having the
Yeah.
multiple building sites. You could take, easier to take advantage of those shared parking benefits.
Well, let's just table that one for now before we completely delete that waiver. I think Lee's point is noted, and we'll just have to make a decision on that, on whether we want to fine tune this, whether, if nobody cares about traffic ultimately, then maybe we just remove this from the waiver, from the administrative waiver section.
One thing, if those buildings are occupied by something that's a conditional use, then the conditional use process will provide
already
the
apply.
opportunity.
Right.
If it's, any conditional use, that's one of the things that's,
Yep.
you'd find on page 55.
Right.
This be run by a, right term, but a friendly developer to say like, you know,
We'll come back around to that point.
okay. How would you?
So, is it all right if we move on from that?
Yes,
and sort of
please.
pick up with the, okay. So, I'd go back to page 29, where we're starting to talk about the public realm standards. The thing that we've done here, and it's worked into a variety of these provisions in small ways, is to just change the emphasis between the green stormwater infrastructure and the traditional and conventional engineering approaches. So we'll see that come in when you actually, if you look at the track changes version, you'll see a lot of small changes that are leading in that direction. And then the actual tables that have the street types in them, that starts on page 32 and carries on for a while. We would like to go in and alter those diagrams and illustrations to emphasize the green stormwater pieces a bit more. It isn't so much that there needs to be changes to the text, it's just highlighting how the green stormwater can work in the illustrations.
So there are no green stormwater illustrations?
There really
in
aren't
here?
any in here, and there are ways to make the ones that are, the illustrations that are there, just a little bit more aligned with that as the sort of the default.
Okay.
So if you look at something like the cross sections
Mhm.
that have the planting beds, they're raised. They could be sunk. It's a pretty simple little change to the illustration, but could be helped, and maybe some labeling on them too that ties back to that. So we weren't necessarily thinking of adding a lot of new illustrations, but just trying to adjust what's here a bit to encourage those. So we see that, like, the access street type, which is, I'm looking on page 34, is sort of that idea of the secondary street with parking, alongside it. Sort of, this is like the most likely type of new street that you would get, to do that, connections between parking lots piece and things like that. And these are showing the raised planting beds. So this would be a great place to show the sunken ones with the parking, with the runoff coming from the parking lots. And then in the plan view, showing the curb, the breaks in the guttering for the curbs from the parking lot, so that water can flow into the green space and that kind of thing. So these are just small adjustments to the existing illustrations. Something to just highlight on your draft, back on page 30. Sorry for jumping around a little bit, but. under the street networks and connectivity, number 2, this is the piece that we've added to address the idea of creating that, creating the interconnected parking lots, but not necessarily the parallel street. So this piece basically says that there, you need to provide those street stubs and/or right-of-ways between projects and things. So that's one of the changes that helps move that forward. And then the other new large element that's in here is also on page 30, the tree belts and soil volume. And this also goes back to this green stormwater infrastructure. If the landscaping and the trees are going to be part of the stormwater system, they need to have enough soil that goes along with them to actually absorb water and infiltrate it, and to make sure the trees are healthy and the plants are healthy, so they can do serve the function that they're supposed to serve. So that's in there. And then the diagram that comes on page 31, this is another one where we thought we would tweak these illustrations to make the green stormwater piece of it a little more emphasized as well. So, just moving through here to see what the other things were I wanted to highlight. If there's anything for a little ways. Okay, so the next thing is actually on page 44. Under the parking area and landscaping requirements, this was a little bit outside our focus that we were supposed to be working on, but Paul, the landscape architect, could not let this go and wanted to address it. So we've tried to clarify and simplify the landscaping requirements for parking lots. You had multiple things going on in terms of requiring plantings and divider islands, and we just tried to make it consistent. So when you see the track changes version, you'll see that we removed some language. I'll pull this up here so I can actually see it. We removed some language around the square footage requirements and trees. So you had requirements around shade tree coverage, and let's see. Yeah, that was based on like there being at least one shade tree for every 150 square feet in a parking lot island. But you also had these requirements about the number of number of trees per parking stalls. They weren't necessarily fitting together and meshing in it. You could do the math for the two different sets, have different numbers. It wasn't really clear how they fit together. So we have simplified that language down and left it with the number of plants per number of parking spaces. And I tried to adjust the language in here too. It was pretty complicated to read, so I'm hoping that in reorganizing it, I've simplified it to some degree as well. So this section got a lot of touching and rearranging, some content based and a lot of it just formatting. And then I think, as you saw in the prior draft, it hasn't been evolved much further than where it was before, but the sustainable design and development standards that start on page 45, all the stuff at the top of page 46 about stormwater, there's a lot of minor tweaking in there to just adjust and make things line up a little bit better. There's not a lot of new wholesale language, but just adjustments. And then with, just continuing to flip ahead, the sign language, I did a similar approach there as I did in the earlier sections, where the language from the text and then the illustrations, I put them together. So it's illustration and then the standards for that type of sign, the illustrations for that type of sign, and the standards for that type of sign. So
Much more readable.
yeah, it makes it a little more yeah, consistent for people to see. So that brings us up to the previously developed sites piece, which is the piece that's brand new content that you haven't seen yet. Some of this is reorganization and pulling language out from other sections of the current code and bringing it here, and some is some new language. So, it looks like, when you look at the draft, the track changes version, it looks like it's all new, but a lot of it actually comes from other parts where it's been deleted. So we moved in the whole discussion of how you deal with pre-existing uses, structures, and sites, and a little bit of restructuring around just how it was organized. Addition or expansion, this is all the language that was here before. Functionally, there isn't change. There's a little bit of formatting and organization changes. The language around historic structures is here and remains content-wise unchanged. Once again, a little bit of restructuring around the formatting. I combined the tables for the density bonuses and the reductions, and just, that's on page 53, to just try to make it clear how those are compared to the text, and then actually took the language out of the text. So you had it both in a table and text form again, so it's just now all in the text or in the table, and the text refers to the tables. So we're not repeating it twice.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so
It's
there's
clean.
it's cleaner, yeah. And then the language related to demolition, that is the same language that you had before, some slight tweaking for format, but nothing new in content. And then the new language is the prior development approvals. This is very similar to the language that you saw in my memo. I think I may have wordsmithed it a little bit more than it was in the memo, but the basic approach is still there. The idea is that someone who comes in with a previously developed site that has a prior, some sort of development approval on it, so it could be an existing site plan, a conditional planned unit development. The applicant comes forward to do some sort of redevelopment. What you were going to want to happen is, because you're actually trying to transition properties into this district, and then they'll stay in this district, is we want to basically convert that approval to approval under these standards. So essentially, the old approval disappears. So you're not having to keep tracking backwards into old zoning. So we want this new approval under the form-based code to be the thing going ahead. So the density question that you asked that we address is basically how to figure out the calculation of existing density on a site, which I suggest we run off the lot area requirements, taking into account the building and any setbacks that are required around the building, to sort of figure out how much density is being used up. This doesn't take into account things like parking lots, say. So it's actually, it's counting the density of the building, not necessarily the way the site is developed, which should encourage and create more possibility for redeveloping these sites, I think. Because of how the form-based code is written and it's building-based, the setbacks and such are measured for each building in some ways. So this is a way to sort of say, almost the way Dean was saying, that, you know, there's a phantom box that amounts to the minimum lot area required for this building, now floating in the middle of this previously approved site plan. And then you can say, okay, so 10,000 square feet of this lot is now allocated essentially to the density needed to support this building that's sitting here and now. They want to add a second building. And so, there's another X amount of square footage of lot left, and under the code, you could put, so much building on that square footage. So it's basically a way of coming up with a rough estimate of how much of the lot is currently being used and allocated to the existing buildings that would remain in the case of an infill development.
So you may remember that when you sent out the memo, I reacted. I said, well, it's going to depend on what those tables say. And I'm trying to navigate around using this really old version of Acrobat, and it's a pain. So I'm just going to ask you. So the land area that's required, basically, we're saying to the developer, first of all, tell us how much land the existing project that you have on your site, how much land would it require under the form-based zoning?
Roughly.
Okay, roughly speaking. Is it based, since form-based zoning is focused on the building type rather than on the use, am I right in thinking that the calculation will be based on building type?
Yep.
Okay, so then what if there's a question about which building type
The current structure
applies?
fits into.
Or what if
Yeah.
it seems like, well, none of them really apply, so
Right.
how do we do it?
Number 2A states
Where
that
it's
if
2206 3C 2A?
Yeah, if an
Okay.
existing building type doesn't fit, if an existing building doesn't fit neatly into one of these types, then
The
we'll just use the
standards of
general commercial one.
2203L is what?
It's a
Commercial?
general,
General
multi-purpose
commercial?
building.
Okay.
So, will we get it, is that gonna be gamed? Can that be gamed? Will someone try to, if it's one of the types that would require more area, and so they'll have lower density, is there gonna be gaming of the system based on
Yeah.
building types?
In other words, you want to say my structure it's a tech park. It's not a general commercial. It's really whatever it is, right? You want to
Yeah, I wanted
steer it into the most favorable.
I don't, right, the developer may be looking for the advantage to say, well, it may be to their advantage to say, oh, no, it's this building type, because if that particular building type requires less land, they're gonna want that to be the building type
Right.
that applies.
For the new building?
Well,
Well,
this
for
is,
the current,
yeah, this is to figure out the land that's already been used up, so I wanna avoid a situation where the board is debating with folks.
The difference amongst the commercial building types is between 5,000 square feet minimum in lot area and 7,500 square feet minimum in lot area. So it isn't enormous.
yeah.
There are some differences in the setbacks, but they're also not huge. So I don't know that is as critical a point. The residential is gonna run off the number of dwelling units, so that's clean. Yeah, so it's really these commercial buildings that might not neatly fit into one of these categories, and if they go into the general one,
So if there's so little difference between the building types, would it be simpler to say, just prescribe a number?
well, the general one is the 7,500 square foot minimum, so it is the larger amount of land. So it's a couple of these building types that are allowed for 5,000 square foot, and so you could get a little higher density in.
You're saying, let's avoid the exercise completely of telling me what
Yeah,
type of
count the
building
number
this
of
is.
buildings, or
Just-
something like that.
If it's a commercial use, here's the,
Well, if it's a building, if
It's a
it's a
yeah.
principal building, then it's going to, we will say
non-residential.
that it's non-residential, that it would be 7,500 square feet. It's just a matter of counting buildings as opposed to,
Except that you could very easily end up with a building that's more than 7,500 square feet in and of itself, which is why I went with the building plus the setbacks.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for a way
I-
not to be gamed and.
I don't think there's a lot of room for gaming, and I guess you brought that you used that term before too, and kind of question, like, what is it that the developer would be gaming that you're not trying to achieve? Aren't you trying to increase the amount of development potential on these lands? So there's that question too, as to, is it really what you're trying to achieve to facilitate the development of these lands, or to,
In other words, are the interests aligned, right? And there really
Yeah.
won't be any gaming.
Well, but we have to assume that there's some logic to the land area that's associated with a given building type, because otherwise they would all have, it's pack them in as much as you can. So we're not trying to do that.
Or as you suggest, just have a flat rate and avoid the dilemma.
well, I mean, I think it has to be at least, the amount of, if you're gonna regulate the density based on the minimum lot area per building, that minimum lot area per building can obviously be less, or it doesn't make a lot of sense for it to be less than the actual square footage of the building.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you can have, you can have a tripwire for a situation.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanna just make it, the 7,500 square feet per building plus, if the building is larger than 7,500 square feet, then it's the footprint of the building, that works
Yeah.
too. But there needs to be something along those lines to calculate the non-residential piece.
That's why this is first
Yeah.
priority for me.
Yeah, no, I know, it's a hard one too to figure out. I mean, ultimately, you're going to be, whoever is administering this is the one that's going to be sitting there having that conversation with an applicant that says, no, it's this type, not that type. So do we want to just avoid that conversation completely? We talk a lot about predictability, right? Like, I tend to think just define what that area is and then add, if it's a bigger structure, it's the size of that structure. I sort of like that idea. It seems a little cleaner to me and avoids having to go back into building types and applicant figure out, I think it's this, but it might be that. And even though the differences aren't that substantial, it just seems administratively cleaner.
Okay, so
Which
you
is
will
another-
you'll be giving more, I was already essentially giving a bonus on density by not including any of the necessary site elements that went with the building, so you're already not considering the parking as part of essentially the density, the lot area that's consumed by this building. Assuming that if you're gonna put in multiple buildings, they're gonna share parking anyway, and so this will
Right.
resolve itself in the overall design. If you went with this idea that we just say it's, 7,500 square feet, which to me would seem to be the logical number, because most of these commercial building types are at the 7,500 square
Yeah.
foot minimum. You're also not gonna take into account the setbacks, they're fairly small setbacks, but there are setbacks that are
Or the
required.
variation in setback by building
Let's
type?
see if buildings are
That's what you
5
mean?
feet. Yeah, they range, 10 feet here, 20 feet there.
What's the
But they're
general
not huge.
commercial? What's the one that you had identified as the default?
The default one I was gonna use was the general purpose building.
What's the setback on that?
And that one is. Find these tables.
5, 20,
That's on page 27.
yeah.
So it's got 5 foot front yards, 20 side and rear. Some of these are 5 foot front, 10
Yeah,
foot side and
side.
rear. A couple of them are 25 feet
Yeah.
rear, They vary, but they're not huge differences.
Yeah.
So I guess the policy question for you guys to determine is how accurately you want this density calculation to reflect as if the project that's there now had been built under these standards.
That would be the easy way, it seems.
Well, a rough approximation, right? And that's sort of what I think you had targeted.
Yeah,
Is that right?
that was
That's
what
the way
I was
I'm-
aiming towards, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that seems reasonable to me.
What does Dean think?
It just feels impossible to get a 1-for-1, right, without knowing.
I think one of the things that just having this discussion and having some sense of the number will do is it allows us to forecast the growth
Right.
potential. Because right now, you know, huge blocks of land are kind of off the table because they're already developed. So what I think ultimately is, I'd like to see what it will mean in terms of development potential, you know, how
Yeah,
much
we can
more-
just assign 7,500 to those
Yeah, right.
lots,
Could-
and
could-
here's the setback, it's 5 and 20.
Right.
And here's the build-out,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, if, yeah, I'd wanna just do some illustrations so that I see how this specific number or a range of numbers pans out in terms of some sites, like, you know, apply this to a teddy bear or a Shelburne Commons or to some
Yeah.
other places to see, well,
Saloon,
yeah, you know, if we
Yeah.
have if we have a site that's 3/4 developed and we end up doing something like this and it translates into basically 90% development potential, I'm thinking, wow, that's a pretty big windfall.
yeah.
That's pretty significant. And you just have to be, you know, mindful of that, because I don't know, I think people, meaning people like the planning commissioners, you folks, are still, it's so abstract. You
Yeah.
don't quite understand how much more development could occur under form-based zoning. And this is gonna give us a good handle on that. We can look at an existing site and say, well, it could be this much more, because we're looking at the existing development in a totally new way. It's basically a third of the land area at a minimum. Yeah, because right now it's 20,000 square feet, and this would be 7,500.
I mean, there certainly are other factors that will then come into play. You'll never get to that theoretical maximum. You know, you have the parking requirements, you have the stormwater
Right.
requirements. Those pieces are going to then start subtracting out from that theoretical maximum.
Yeah. But it will help us sketch it out
Mhm.
on some of those key
Okay.
sites that are,
Yeah, so I can simplify that non-residential calculation then in that manner to 7,500 square feet, and then if the building footprint is greater than 7,500 square feet.
okay.
And so that would then allow you to do that calculation, and then, you know, it's a simple matter of taking the lot area, subtracting what you got,
Right.
see what you got left, and then applying the building type standards going forward in terms of much you can develop
Mm-hmm.
infill. And then the last piece of this is the conditions of approval. So you have a previously approved site plan or PUD or something, and it has in its prior approval a bunch of conditions. Some of those conditions may be on their face sort of in conflict with standards that are here in the form-based code. They would not be applied under the form-based code if you were to start over. So an example of this might be, you know, a requirement that that came in as a condition of approval to keep a, 50-foot green space landscape, say, along the frontage. Well, now your standard is you want to bring the buildings up to
Right.
the street. So this condition that's on the project
It's no longer consistent with
is no longer
the
consistent
goal.
with your goal,
Yeah.
your overall goal. So the idea is that the applicant could come in and request that those prior conditions be eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, I put it at the applicant's request, so they can decide, if they believe and can demonstrate that the condition isn't consistent with what you're currently calling for in the form-based code, then it's something that DRB can eliminate. And otherwise, the conditions that are on those prior approvals would fold into the conditions that would be on the form-based code approval moving forward. So
Makes
this is
sense
sort of
to me.
their chance to come in and clean off part of the
Right.
slate, some or all of the prior approved conditions, and move ahead under this new paradigm.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think that would be the goal, right? If there are inconsistent conditions, let's get them out in the open and have a conversation and adjust it accordingly.
It is putting the onus on the owner, the property owner
Yeah.
applicant, to look at their site, look at this code, and make some determinations about what they want to do going forward with it. It's not a magic wand of, we're just gonna eliminate it all, and you come in and start over. So there may have been some conditions that were put on an application for a reason that still remains valid. You know, there may have been a concern at an intersection about traffic, and that still remains a valid concern, and it's not a condition that would go away. And, you know, a similar condition would have gotten applied if they had come in under this code too. So it's gonna take some work as these sites come in. It's not gonna be as potentially black and white as you hoped
Yeah.
the form-based code would be, because you've got to sort of sort through the prior, what
Yeah.
exists,
Yeah.
which is a little bit gray.
It's not
We're trying
easy-
to get it
it's
to
not
black and
easy
white.
doing it on
We're
a
trying to get it to black
heavily
and white, but
developed
we're not there yet
corridor.
entirely.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's good.
So I think
that
that's,
works.
you know, that's the cleanest way to deal with those, is to try to get a whole new approval that covers the site. And I know, Dean, you and I talked a little bit about this, if, it could be a bit of a disinclination for someone who just wants to make a minor change to their property to come forward through the system. Because it kind of takes them looking at the thing in its entirety, to some degree, to sort of see how they fit in with these new rules and what they might want changed going forward. But
One other quick reaction to this is that I like its simplicity. I'm a little bit, I'll want to see it in action before I feel comfortable, but that's of course going to take time. I'm wondering if the paragraph would be a good place for some language, like we've seen in other parts of our regulations, where the authority of the DRB is emphasized. Basically, something to the effect that it's entirely up to the DRB to make the decision whether or not it complies with dimensional or development standards. And if they decide that it doesn't, then that's it. So in other words, give the DRB lots of discretion. And the reason I'm saying that is that I do see a scenario playing out where someone is going to argue that something that is just not clearly related to the standards in the form-based zoning, they're going to say that it is. And it might be or it might not be. And I'm just trying to think of an example of what I mean. There could be some project, and I know these are just hypotheticals, that has some arcane condition having to do with lighting, and arguably the form-based zoning won't really address it. So does that mean that the developer gets to say, well, because the form-based zoning doesn't have a standard for it, I meet the standard, and therefore I need that condition removed? Or will it not? So anyway, I'm just looking for something where it's that the board gets to say, no, we determine whether or not you are meeting the public interest, essentially, and we look back at the record and we see that, yeah, there was a reason for this.
So I have two thoughts on that. The one thing is that the sentence says the applicant must demonstrate that the condition conflicts with a dimensional or development standard. So in my mind, that means that there is an applicable dimensional or development standard but maybe that is language that we could emphasize a little bit more. And I can change that to be the applicant must demonstrate and the DRB must find, so that your DRB piece is emphasized. I think it's also important to emphasize that the burden is on the applicant to make this case. Yep, can do that. So I have one final piece of business that I'd like you to consider. In terms of how to move forward and get feedback on the draft, I think we were all disappointed in the turnout, perhaps, for the public meeting that we had. And not that we didn't have useful conversation, but we didn't get perhaps as broad a base of input as we had hoped. The thought that we have on that would be to reach out to some of the developers, major property owners, more directly. Get them this draft and potentially do something along the lines of a focus group type meeting where we sit down with a more focused group of individuals who have a real who are stakeholders in this and they have an interest in it, and perhaps also a bit more of the technical knowledge and to look through it and provide some meaningful feedback to you. And I mean, you will get, obviously they have an interest, and you know that, And so, you know, I think we just need to be clear, and I think you heard Larry
Yes.
Larry Williams, you know,
Yep.
some of his concerns. I'm sure there were some of those you agreed with and some you didn't. I'm sure that if we do this process and we invite some more folks in, that will be the way going forward. But at least you're getting the feedback from those who are the most likely to use this document to actually
Yeah.
develop properties. So
So
that would be
what-
my recommendation to think about doing. in
And
the
what would the
next-
goal there be, just as another layer of review?
To get that feedback
To
as
get
we do that
additional
final.
input to you?
Yeah, we do the final revisions of this.
Okay.
I think that helps answer your question about, you know, have we made this more functional?
Right. But they all haven't necessarily seen the current version or spent time on it to
No.
know, has it improved or not? At least we can get baseline reactions from some of them on, does this seem workable? Are there things that are just complete red flags?
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, as Larry was calling out,
Right.
there were a few things that just,
And I think we addressed a couple of those, and a couple of them are sort of major policy shifts for
Right.
you that
yeah, exactly.
we didn't take
where-
on. But at least you had that feedback, and I think more of that feedback would be useful.
So the one challenge will be timing, I think. Finding that focus group to commit the hours to
Doing it.
do it within the time frame of your engagement. is
I mean,
what
we
I'm
certainly need to do
concerned
this as soon as possible, and we are losing people to high summer.
about. Well, that's what I just get worried about. I don't know how realistic it is in my
Does it
mind to
have
sort
to
of
be a-
ask people like,
I mean, does it have to be a synchronous thing where, in other words, that we all have to get together and think, or can this document be shared
yeah,
to select people? And they've got people on staff, I mean, the group I worked in, you had someone who was sort of the
Spend the
code
time
person,
on-
you know, and just be like, and maybe it's a survey, you know, here's the 5 questions we want answered, you know,
yeah,
what do you hate most about it, your red flag issues, what do you like about it? Why would you know, what would be the reason you would pick to follow this path? Why
Yeah.
wouldn't you follow this path,
Right.
you know, I mean.
So, yeah, we could take it in that direction if that's the direction you want to go, or if you know, whatever you think is the most effective way. I'm certainly willing to facilitate
Yeah.
you know, meaning I can't do individual sit-downs with a whole bunch of people, but I'm certainly willing to do one. And if we can get 3 or 4 people that have looked at it that want to come and give feedback and talk through it, that would be great. And if we want to do it from a more of a survey form, sort of, you send us back your written comments, that could work as well.
If we can get somebody to mark up one of these, do you want to consider that as well?
Hmm?
If I can get somebody to mark up one of these?
Yes, certainly.
So if you're looking for a green light from the commission to do the focus group, I don't know that there's any.
there were no objections. I just, I have a couple people I can reach out to. The timing is what I'm not sure is realistic to me.
Well,
Just knowing, it's a pretty dense document, it's
Or are you
almost
thinking-
July.
Are you thinking that by structuring it as a focus group, you'll avoid the need for them to go through the whole thing, and you'll be able to zero in on the 2 or 3 or 5 specific things that you think are gonna be most critical, and you can walk them through it, because it's a lot.
It's
And
a
maybe
lot.
they will have someone on staff, or, you know, maybe some of them, but
I mean, certainly if we do it as a focus group, there is that option of being able to talk through some of the key points a little bit more. But if it's a group of people sitting around a table who've not ever looked at it, I'm not sure we're gonna get the level of detailed feedback
That's
either
what
that you're
I
looking for.
Some have. I mean,
So-
some have been involved with it.
Mm-hmm.
So Brian, for example, will be more familiar with just the structure and the concepts and how it's laid out and,
And I mean, I think we could structure a memo to go along with this that would highlight, you know, these are the areas we have been working on. You know, these are the particular pieces for you to go look at, for you to consider. You know, particularly, I think a number of these are probably people with previously developed sites, right? You know, think about that infill potential, go look at this, you know, as a means, and then how would you, you know,
yeah, I think
could you
that-
use this?
I think that's a good idea, if we can steer them more specifically in a structured way to say, focus on these sections, and it just seems more manageable. I'd hate to drop a document like this on someone and say, have at it, provide input, by, you know, 2 weeks out. There's just a lot to digest. So for example, stormwater. I'm sure that a lot of these developers would object to what we're doing from a policy perspective. Maybe they love it, but I don't really think we need a lot of input in that area. I feel like that's a pretty polished section that is clean. Love it or leave it, right? I just don't feel like the input there will be as valuable. I think there are some other sections. I mean, we'd sort of look to you to call out, where do you think it's most fuzzy, or where can we fine tune this more? Dean, of course, has the best handle on that as well. I think if it's a concise here, we need your input on these 5 sections, and is there anything else you'd like to weigh in on? Here's an opportunity.
Is any part of the issue that we just need to make sure, we need to make a decision that whether people are going to give names to Brandy and she's going to contact them, or
Yes.
members are, okay. Because I don't know, I could easily imagine some people feeling that I got a relationship with this person, I'll be the one that asks them, but that's just gonna take more time. I think that if we gave Brandy a list, and
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly send out, we put together an organized, you and I can talk about timing and put together an organized outreach strategy. And then if you did have people that, you had a relationship with, once we sort of have done an initial contact, if you wanted to do a follow-up.
yeah, I mean, I
That
think
would be
that in the
great.
past, commissioners have said they have people
Yeah.
in mind, we just need to get those names.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think as long as we do it, like, an official invite goes out and request, and then if the planning commission members wanna follow up with the people they know and speak to them about it.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
But if you have names, send
Yeah, the
them.
names would be great.
Yep.
yeah.
Everybody good on that? Share some names and suggestions, and we'll see what kind of response we get. Okay. The last question I had, Brandy, is where did we land on public art? I know we
I was
discussed
gonna ask
that.
that.
Yeah,
I know we had Paul's memo, and I
Right.
can't remember if we didn't spend that much commission time.
No, so at this point, we have not, the wayfinding signage piece is still sort of sitting there as a blank spot, as a holding pattern. The problem that we've been debating back and around our team is that, for the most part, a lot of this is stuff that would be occurring in public spaces and right of ways. In which case, it's not necessarily a zoning matter.
Yeah.
However, we do want to go in and make sure that we have not, we aren't creating any barriers to it, which we don't really think there are now. We want to make another pass-through and ask about, with that in mind. And then that idea that Paul came up with of sort of perhaps a permanent site, but a rotating exhibit, or the idea of an underutilized site sort of putting it into a temporary use, and trying to simplify that from a permitting perspective. That, I think, is something that we could add into this, that's fairly simple. So I guess my point is, at this point, the overlay district doesn't really do anything to actively discourage the art piece in particular. It doesn't also do anything much to encourage it.
Yeah.
And I think we can probably do a little bit more to make it easy for someone to do that. But the zoning in and of itself, and I think that was the point that Paul was trying to make with his memo, the overlay district is not going to create public art or, convince people to put public art in. That's really going to take another effort. It's talking about the community's identity and getting a group of people enthusiastic about the concept and moving it forward. We really just need to make sure that it's an easy process and this doesn't create barriers.
Yeah.
Again, it's too bad Kate's not here,
Yeah.
because she was a
She
fan
has
of that.
strong views, yeah. Okay.
Is it something to call out in the town plan to be encouraged? Definitely.
It certainly could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only other angle that I thought of was, thinking of grafting on something having to do with landscaping that requires requires or somehow encourages public art to be a component of the landscaping. So when there's a site plan review and there's landscaping, something about public art is incorporated. But I don't know if you've seen any examples, if they would even be appropriate, but that's another approach.
I could certainly see if you were running more of an incentive-based system as making that one of the
Yeah.
goals. If you did this, then you got more, but you don't really have an incentive-based system set up in here now. So it seems.
Little bit of density bonuses, right? On the
Yeah, for
historic
the
sites,
historic
yeah.
sites, yeah. So, I mean, if you had more of that type of carrot approach going, that's not really what form-based code
Yeah,
does. That's not
right.
the approach it takes. So, I'm not sure that's a particularly good fit. I mean, the one thing you could do would be to provide an offset against landscaping if you provided art, but I think that opens up more, right, I mean, my worry would be that what would qualify as
What
public art and who gets to
yeah.
decide? I mean, I
No
think
one
that's,
Right, yeah.
Really,
That could
it does
end you-
become one of those,
yeah, that could
Rabbit
end up in
holes
a
of-
really unpleasant community
Yeah.
discussion for quite a while.
yeah,
Um,
unintended consequence of,
yeah, so,
Less complicated
Yeah.
already.
yeah,
all right, well,
I mean,
that's fair. I mean, we have Paul's memo, it did sound
Mhm.
like it's a committee type
I mean, maybe one
ground
of
up
the
sort
other
of
things to think
initiative
about
that,
is to think about more building based art and making sure that it wouldn't trigger being called a sign. So say if somebody wanted,
Yeah.
wanted to put a mural, I just discovered while driving up and down Route 5, as I seem to be doing a lot of these days, in Norwich, just the warehouse that King Arthur Flower has this really lovely like wheat stencil
Mhm.
thing on the corner. It's really quite pretty. It's dressing up their otherwise plain box of a warehouse. But in many cases, that would actually count as a sign,
right,
right? In terms of how you define what a sign means. And so you could say, yes, it's a sign on this warehouse for King Arthur Flower, but really it's just really pretty. And it could be considered a nice, attractive aesthetic element and
yeah,
not really, it's not like that you can actually do anything there. That you
Yeah.
can look at it. You can't go in the warehouse. You have to go down the street a little further if you want a scone. So, things like that, we could maybe look in there in the sign section and just make sure that if you wanted to do something with a building that would
yeah.
be interesting.
Be interesting to look at the Plan BTV, the south, the Pine Street corridor, see how if they did anything around public art or,
Mhm.
I mean, there's so much there that's just so organic, it's hard to prescribe some of this stuff. It just has to happen and
Yeah, I
not
think
put up barriers
in
to it.
getting
is
out
the
of the way
key.
of it is
Get out of the way,
is
yeah.
the key piece.
All right. So the last question while I had you, and I know it's almost 10, is I recall there was, a big piece of this is how do we get the word out, right?
Yeah.
How do we communicate? We had talked about a website or some module where we might be able to get the word out. Essentially, marketing was a big
Yeah,
piece of the 2.0 conversation, and that was the one question in my mind is I don't know what your thoughts are on that or.
so my tentative plan at this point, and we've had a little bit of, Dean and I had a bit of a conversation about the website and sort of what we can and can't
Yeah.
manage to get up there. And at this point, probably the most realistic thing to do is to come up with a sort of some handouts, some guidance documents that can both be printed out and handed out to people and can be put up on the website. That would help explain some of these elements. That we can utilize a lot of the existing graphics and things that we have here
Yeah.
too. Some site photos. Paul has taken a pretty good set of site photos and do some annotation of those. But basically make some, 1 and 2 page handouts that help explain this, what you're trying to achieve, and how some of the pieces work, which that's where my brain is going, but we sort of need to have this cemented down before.
Understood. Yeah,
Before
no,
we
and
start
I think
drafting
that
those.
works fine if
Yeah.
there's some informational
Yep.
kind of pamphlet or flyer or material that gets the word out
Yep.
to
Yep.
to prospective applicants, right?
Yeah.
Or, I think about retailers, right? It's sort of one of those, if they have brokers out or people who are looking for potential locations.
Right, you don't necessarily want to have
I'm not
this,
saying
but
Amazon and Whole Foods
Right.
necessarily, but if Target, whoever is out sort of looking at space on a week-to-week basis, be good to have that type of thing available
Mhm.
if they're searching and however we do our
Yep.
optimization for folks looking at stuff, so, yeah, that'd be great. Any other questions from the group?
Just very quickly on that point, the select board has either or will be considering authorizing one of their members to develop some economic development proposals.
Okay.
And maybe there's some overlap,
Maybe.
the potentials that are offered by
Yep.
form-based zoning and what they mean, and maybe they
Yep.
can make that
Is
part
that
of
with
what-
Jerry?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, Brandy, thank you for the continued work and effort on this and the time coming up here with us. Do we have a date for the select board check-in? Is that just once we, okay,
Is the answer that there hasn't been a date.
we'll set that once we
I think you, right, you need to-
finalize our,
yeah,
Okay.
I mean, my hope would be that we get the feedback on this, we get the graphics updated. You guys have your chance to sort of dig into this in a little more detail. Now that I've got it all clean, all three of us on the consultant team, probably we too, we're gonna go through it one more time
okay,
for our housekeeping and trying to make sure that we've at least eliminated any major headaches and
Okay.
complications and give you something.
great.
And
And
version
what-
2.0 has fewer bugs.
Yep, and we'll have a cumulative red line, right, a
Yeah.
track changes version to look at to just help
Yeah.
expedite the review, that'd be
Yep.
great.
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, Brandy.
Have a good
Thanks
evening.
to your team as well.
Yeah.
Yes, all right. Last items on our agenda are Commissioner Q questions and comments. Anything to comment on, since it's almost 10 o'clock? Guessing no. And the last item is other business. I know we want to just do a quick check-in on the town plan sections and assignments. If we could project that quickly, just so we know, as we plan the agenda for the next meeting, how we want to think about the next few. We had sketched out energy as one of the plans right?
And actually, yes, the packets included
Yep.
some of the material from
Yeah,
the
I
Regional
saw that.
Planning Commission. They was not quite a full slate, but it's material to review.
Mhm.
They can carry, that deadline evidently has been extended, so we could push that back.
Okay. So we'll be in growth area 2 at the next meeting. Dick's got the ball on that. Dick's also got the ball in the rural area. And are those kind of tag teaming with Kate, Dick? Is that the idea? She's got the
She had
umbrella,
said her name first for land use, and Dick had said specific interest in
growth area
growth
2
area 2
and
and
rural.
the village.
Okay.
Although, if you've changed your
I'm
mind.
fine with that. So you'll take the lead on reworking the goals and
On growth area
objectives for
2.
growth area 2?
Sure.
Okay. Because I think we'll probably need 2 hours, just given how long it's taken us. We'll probably spend 2 hours on growth area 2, but we should be prepared to jump into the rural. Following that, what do we think? Do folks have a preference? Do you think energy is something you want to move up as far as discussions go? Do you want to wait? Do you want to?
Could be. I was going through what you sent out. I may just need to check in with you at some point to understand. I mean, I get the concepts of what they're talking about, but to get a bit more guidance.
Yeah. There
But
was a
other-
lot of material, but.
Yeah. It's not small.
Yeah, that checklist is, oh man, murder.
The other thing I'll say is there's something to be said, at least for me, for getting momentum. And some of these smaller sections, we can feel like we're knocking them out.
We can knock out childcare in about
That's what-
15 minutes
That's,
if you
well, I'm
want,
saying,
if you want
like,
an easy win.
there's something to be,
Encourage
you know, hey, we've already been through X number of sections, and sometimes it can just be, you know, downshifting a little bit on the content. Not saying we'll spend less time, but some of the content's less, I mean, this is tough. The land use section, the growth section is hard, energy is going to be a slog, so layering in some of the lower, yeah,
Yeah, I would say.
Parks
pick
and
one
Rec.
of the smaller ones
Right?
per each time.
Yeah.
You can knock a whole section off and get as far through one.
Yeah,
Makes
I think
sense.
it would help.
Makes us feel good.
help us exhale a little bit on some of this. Okay. And everybody's still good with the assignments? All right, Dean and I will, we'll figure that out. Any other business, Dean, before we adjourn?
Low on blood sugar.
Okay. Well, with that, we will consider a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Moved by Jason. Second? Seconded by Andrew. All in favor? Aye. Thanks, everybody.